I'm the current use section chief. Just a disclaimer here, I'm the new current use section chief. I've been here for about 6 months, and I remember, 5 months ago, they said I'd be given a training on the program in March, and I thought, oh my God. And, but, like a lot of you listers, getting thrown into the deep end is good sometimes, and you just got to figure it out. And luckily, we've got a lot of qualified people in the office here, and kind of on that same point, I've got specialists in the chat. So if you have any questions while I'm giving my presentation, feel free to ask them, and you should get a response. Anything we can't answer, we'll definitely follow up with you after today. So just to kind of briefly qualify, I moved to Vermont in 2021. Before that, I joined the military straight out of high school, served on board the USS Blue Ridge outside of Yokosuka, Japan. I came back to Virginia, went to school in Lynchburg, and got an undergraduate degree with a focus in environmental studies. I grew up in a rural area. I've always found a lot of peace and joy out in the woods. So I wanted to make that my career. I became a conservationist, worked at a few not-for-profits, then went to a municipality in the Shenandoah Valley, managed some big capital improvement projects, and then in 2021 moved to Vermont after getting my master's degree in public administration. Became the town manager in Proctor. I did that for 2 years. I don't know if I've got any Proctor family out there, but that was an incredible 2 years of my life. Then an opportunity came up in Killington. I was a town manager in Killington for a year, and then did some soul searching and wanted to get back into conservation preservation work. And here I am, very proud to be managing the current use program. I know there's a lot of pros and cons and a lot of opinions about it, but my own personal and professional opinion, I think a healthy environment, supports the health and happiness of society. So it's very important that we care for it. And current use is a huge part of that. So let me get going on the slides. Okay, so a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We'll talk about the purpose of the Use Value Appraisal program. Real quick, for anybody that's new out there, I use the terms Use Value Appraisal and current use interchangeably. All right, the actual name for the program is longer than both of those terms, but if you hear me say Use Value Appraisal, I'm talking about current use. All right. We'll talk about eligibility. We'll talk about the enrollment process. We're kind of software experts here, as I'm sure many of you have become. Experts at kind of a diverse mix of software. So we use eCuse, we use VTPIE, and then for enrollments, we're using myVTax. So the purpose of current use is very clearly outlined in statute, and let me kind of give you the overview of that. So, the program is here to encourage and assist the maintenance of Vermont's productive agricultural and forest land, to encourage and assist in their conservation and preservation for future production use, and for the protection of natural ecological systems, to prevent and accelerate conversion of these lands to more intensive use by the pressure of property taxation at values incompatible with the productive capacity of the land, to achieve more equitable taxation for undeveloped lands, to encourage and assist in the preservation and enhancement of Vermont's scenic natural resources, and to enable the citizens of Vermont to plan its orderly growth in the face of increasing development pressures in the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare. So in a nutshell, what's happening here is you can't be a prince from overseas come over to Vermont, buy land, have 100 acres of forest land enrolled, and not do anything with it. Okay, so we manage a program where you must have a working plan. So in this case, forest land, you've got to manage this plan in accordance with the best management practices that have been established by Forest Parks and Rec. And I also kind of want to add the caveat here. I'm not ignorant to the fact, I don't think any of us here in the office are, that we're going through a housing crisis. Just to kind of give some people some relief here, the conversation of housing and current use, they're happening together in the State House this year. So when I say we, I mean me and the other specialists. We run the program very strictly off of statute. However, there are scenarios that come up that statute does not define or give us a clear path on where to go. So in those cases, how do we solve it? Well, for most of them, there have been rules established, and those rules are established by the Current Use Advisory Board. The Current Use Advisory Board also establishes the use values once a year. We'll get more into what the use values are, just so you know. But the current use, I think it's very important for people to know this. This is a fact that I think is often overlooked. The Current Use Advisory Board are made up of 4 state staff members and then 8 members appointed by the governor. So you've got the Commissioner of Taxes or his or her designee, which is myself. You have the Director of Division of Property Valuation and Review, which is Joe Remick. Secretary of Agriculture, the Commissioner of Forest Parks and Rec, and then the appointed members, the 8 appointed members, are set there by the governor and approved by the Senate. 2 of them represent the private agricultural sector, 2 represent the private forestry sector. 1 has to be experienced in agricultural and forestry property appraisal and valuation techniques. 1 has to be a representative of local government. 1 has to be a select board member, and then 1 has to be a selector. To expand on that, 51% or more of the board members cannot have enrolled lands, nor can any of their family members, close family members, spouse, child, or parent. Again, here are the powers and duties, as you can see on the screen. They establish use values, they adopt rules, and they hear testimony. So what are the benefits of enrollment? Why in the world would I ever want to kind of hand over any authority to the government to control my land? Well, there are significant property tax savings if you want to be a part of it. It's also important to remember that we're talking about enrolled land. Not an entire parcel necessarily qualifies for enrollment, nor does the owner fill out an application to enroll the whole parcel. So excluded land and non-enrolled buildings do not receive benefits. I'll give you a quick example of this. If I've got 100 acres of forest land, but I've got a house on it, then I'm going to exclude those 2 acres. So that 2-acre land that surrounds my house, that will not be enrolled in the program. It will not receive current use benefits. And then they're taxed. The land that is enrolled is taxed at use value instead of the appraised or assessed value, also known as the fair market value. So we just the Current Use Advisory Board in February just established new use values for 2025. Agricultural land is set at $510 per acre. Forest and conservation land is $203 per acre. Forest and conservation land greater than a mile is 125 acres. So those are our 3 categories of enrollment. And then we also allow farm buildings to enroll into the program, and those buildings are not taxed at all. So, you know, if fair market value of the building's $100, you know, it's $0 reflected on the tax bill. It's also important to remember, it took me a little while to be able to wrap my mind around this. We'll talk more about the calculation in a second, and I don't expect you to be, you know, experts on it. Well, at least the new ones here. After I explain it to you, it takes a bit to understand, but the higher the use value, the lower the benefit. Okay, so you get a bigger bang for your buck if you're going to enroll forest and conservation land than you are agricultural land. So,
Michael?
yes.
It's Christy. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. I have forest land at 283 per acre. Is it 203 or 283?
203.
203.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where you getting 283 at?
I must have wrote it down wrong.
Okay, no, it's all right. I want to make sure it's not on the website incorrectly.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Now, considerations before enrolling. So why would you not want to enroll in current use? Well, there's a contingent lien placed on the land at the time of approved enrollment. Okay, we're gonna talk a little bit about contingent lien and land use change tax later in the presentation, but just know that when you enroll into the land, there is risk. So there is going to be penalty if you want to unenroll your land from current use. So in most cases, or at least it's going to happen sometime down the line. But anyway, we'll get more into that later. So there's a cost to prepare application materials and updates. There's a cost for a forest management plan. You've got to do regular harvesting. You've got inspections by the state. That stuff takes time. I don't quote me on this, but I was at a private lands committee meeting a couple weeks ago, and one of the consulting foresters said that, you know, a forest management plan usually costs a landowner between $1,500 to $2,000. If I'm way off on that, and there's an expert here, feel free to correct me, but you know, it ain't cheap. But the benefits you can receive of enrollment probably offset that cost. Ag land and buildings require annual certification. So the way that we monitor agricultural land in the program is that every year, under Scout's honor, you got to send us. You have to send us an ag certification form saying that you're still using the land for its purpose that you said it was when you enrolled. If the property value is low, savings are minimal. And again, we're talking more about land use change tax, but if the land ever becomes developed, then the land use change tax becomes due. All right, let's kind of let's play by the numbers here. Current use enrollment from 1980 to 2023. I'm sorry if this graph is hard to read, but really, you know, I just want to use it as a visualization. It's a popular program. It has done nothing but grow since 1980, and it continues to grow. Over 1/3 of the state's land is enrolled in current use. Over 19,000 parcels, and we receive about 1,700 applications a year. And those include transfers, new enrollments, addition to transfers. There are 2,575,000 acres enrolled. And then we also manage about 700 withdrawals every year. And we'll talk more about withdrawals later on as well. The savings to enrolled landowners total is about 76 million. Well, not about exactly 76,192,200 $271. All right, so now I don't want to get us too far into the weeds, but I think it is kind of important that we all know where where we come up with these savings. And if I start kind of leaving you in the dust, please just kind of chat, jump into the chat, let us know, and of course we're always happy to talk to you offline about this stuff. But on this slide here, I've got an example of a property that is enrolled in the program and that is not enrolled in the program. And I'm using last year's use values. Okay, so 188 was last year's forest lands use value per acre. So here you can see both these properties have 100 acres. The use value is 188 per acre, but the fair market value is 1,500 per acre. So the total use value for property number one, which is the top one there, 100 times 188, it's $18,800. That's their total use value, and the total fair market value for property number two is 150,000. All right. So if there's a 2% tax rate, you can see here on the most far right, the annual taxes for these property owners significantly different. So it's a very impactful tax savings in the sum of $2,624 a year. I wouldn't mind to save $2,624 a year. But I'm not enrolled in the program. So so next slide here, example of benefits for 50 acres of enrolled forest land. So in this slide, we're gonna walk you through the calculation. All right. So you got 50, and we're also going to use, again, we're going to use last year's use value. So say this person has 50 acres of enrolled forest land, and its fair market value is $169,100. The use value calculation is the value of the enrolled land, the value of the enrolled land for tax calculation. So you take the acres enrolled, multiply it by the use value, and then multiply that by the CLA. So in this case, you've got 50 acres of forest land. You multiply 188 acres. You take that, you multiply the CLA, you get $9,600. Okay, and then you find the exempt reduction, which is the amount of the taxable value that is decreased. Okay, so I'm going to skip all the way down to the bottom here. You had your fair market value, which was $169,100. You subtracted your total use value, $9,600, and you came up with $159,500. Keep that number in mind for the next slide, okay? So here is an example of what it would look like on the tax bill. All right, so the real fair market value, $474,300. You subtract that by $159,500. Okay, that was the number that we had here at the bottom of the slide. So you subtract 159,500 from 474,300, and that is your new grand list value, $3,148. I hope everybody followed that. It's a tough one.
If they didn't, Michael, we go over all of these fund calculations in maybe a little bit excruciating length during our presentation, so don't worry about it. So if anybody's having trouble following, we'll get you there, we promise.
Okay, good. I'm not a math person, so I have a lot of empathy for people on here who may not be able to. Well, so let's talk a little bit about hold harmless payments and foregone revenue. I guess the big question is, hold on, if these people are getting, such a huge benefit, then who's paying the difference? Well, it kind of happens in two ways, because we have a municipal tax and education tax. So for the town, the state pays what we call a hold harmless payment. Hold harmless payments are made in the fall for the prior calendar year. And we're just making up the difference that the town did not receive on properties that got current use benefits. And then the foregone education fund revenue is the difference between education property taxes collected with benefits and the fair market value. So now we're going to get into the different categories of enrollment. And I know you can't see me, but I'm going to take a sip of water real quick. All right.
Actually, your camera is on, Michael.
Oh, I am. Oh, good. I'm glad to know that. So let's talk about, again, before we get into it, we've got three categories. We're going to talk about the first one now, which is forest land. So how are you eligible to enroll your land as forest land in the current use program? Well, first of all, you have to have at least 25 acres of enrolled managed forest land. It must have a forest management plan, and that forest management plan must come with a map. Non-productive forest land and land where timber is not the principal objective may be enrolled in limited circumstances: ESTA, reserve forest land, wildlife habitat. Now, we don't, property valuation review, which current use is an arm of, we work very closely with Forest Parks and Rec. Forest Parks and Rec staff review forest management plan, any application with a forest management plan before it comes to us. So they kind of get in the weeds of, is this really forest land? Is it going to qualify for the program? How's the management of the land going to work? And then we handle more of the taxation and administrative side of it. And then if the owner is qualified farmer, unlimited non-productive forest land and up to 25 acres of productive forest land can be enrolled without a forest management plan. Conservation land enrollment. I guess this is a semi-newer category here, but it falls under forest land. The owner must be a qualified organization, meaning they need to be a 501c3 and with a land conservation focus. The parcel must be certified per 10 VSA prior to April 1st. Conservation management plan must be approved by FPR. No minimum acreage, and use value is the same as forest land.
Michael, you may have covered this already, but the acronym FPR stands for again?
Oh, my apologies. Forest Parks and Recreation.
Thank you.
It's a bad habit of mine. All right, so we're going to get into the next category here: agricultural land and buildings. So what is agricultural land? This comes up a lot. with us. You know, we'll get someone applying for current use that doesn't qualify, and they'll say, hold on, but this program says that my land is agricultural land, and we say, well, that program kind of follows other rules and laws. We go by the current use definition of agricultural land as defined by statute. And in a quick summary here, to qualify as agricultural land, it must be used to pasture livestock, grow hay or crops. It's got to be an orchard. It has to produce an annual maple product. And then there are also I'm sorry, I see a lot of stuff. I see some stuff in the chat here asking me to define some of these acronyms. CRAP, I can't help you with. CRAP and buffers required for agency of ag rules. I could try CRAP. No, I can't do it. I'm sure somebody in the chat can help out maybe. Okay, so if it's less than 25 acres, if you want to enroll land, agricultural land that's less than 25 acres in the program, it must be an active agricultural use, as I just defined, and the owner must be a qualified farmer, leased to a qualified farmer, or the land earns $2,000 per year income from the sale of farm crops. Now, I have a lot of sympathy for people here. You know, you see Joe Farmer at the store, you know he's a farmer. He's been working on his farm his entire life. He smells like a farmer. It does not mean that he qualifies as a farmer. What we have to do if someone wants to qualify as a farmer by income, we have to ask for their federal income tax returns, and 50% of their gross income has to come from the business of farming. Or you can qualify under the 2,000 per year income rule, or leased to a qualified farmer, but that person has to meet those same federal income thresholds. And then ag buildings must be an active agricultural use and either owned or leased to a qualified farmer. All right, we're rolling right on through. I want to do a time check here. Oh, 9:30. I think I'm doing okay. Let's talk about the application process. There are two ways you can do it online, or you can send in a paper application. The form is called a CU 301, and the state still uses eCuse. So the landowner can apply through eCuse. A lot of times their consulting forester does it for them. They can pay online or by check, but you know, we encourage them to use a voucher. And then we still accept paper maps, leases, income statements, etc. And then you can apply using paper form, which is a fillable PDF, and you can call the tax department forms hotline for a paper copy. You can also find it on our website. We've got all of our forms on the website, along with tons of informational packets. I always have to get a picture of my dog every time I do a presentation, even though it might not be super relevant, but that's Lucas. I thought, don't be a lazy dog, get your applications in on time. So if you want to enroll in the program and you're new to it, or it's an addition to enrollment, you have to apply before September 1st. That's the postmark deadline for paper applications. eCuse deadline by the end of the day, and paper documents will follow within 30 days, and forest management plans are due by October 1st. And again, we don't review forest management plans. Forest Parks and Rec reviews those. Transfer and partial transfers, you have to apply within 30 days after the transfer occurs. And this is an important note for all you clerks out there. On the PTTR, there's a section G, with two questions, G1, G2. G1 asks, is the property being sold enrolled in current use? And the second question, G2, is, does the property plan to continue to stay enrolled in current use? Now, staff only knows if a property wants to continue in current use if they check the boxes correctly. That's how our system knows to send out letters to notify the new owner that they have 30 days to enroll. We see very often that these boxes are checked incorrectly. And then we retroactively have to go to someone who might have transferred property back in 2019 and say, hey, hold on, you checked your PTTR wrong. And it creates an uncomfortable situation. So definitely not your responsibility, but just a heads up, it's something we deal with a lot. We have to train our lawyers better, not our lawyers, but the lawyers. And then when you submit a map with your application, we do have map standards. We're revising those right now with Forest Parks and Rec. We've got our map standards, our existing map standards online. You know, if anybody wants to look at that, you know, feel free to. You know, this isn't very important for the training, but just to let you know, we've got applications with land records and maps that go back, you know, back to the 80s. You probably wouldn't be shocked, but the different formats of maps that we have, it's just unreal. So you know, we're trying to definitely get into the world where we're accepting a standard map, and it's hard to do because we're addressing the needs of kind of a diverse clientele, and we don't want to make enrollment in the program too difficult, but we also don't want to make our review too difficult because it slows us down from meeting our own deadlines, and organizing our files. So again, if anybody's interested in what our map standards are, you can go to the current use website. All right, lien. Here we go. I'm going to take a sip of water before I get into this. Approved applications are filed in the town records as a contingent lien on the land. I'm going to expand on that a little bit. So when someone is enrolled in current use, their application has been approved. That gets recorded into the town's land records, and it acts as a contingent lien. What is it? What is the lien contingent to? It's contingent to development. So not until this property is developed does the lien become due. So let me kind of give you an example here. I'm a farmer and I got 50 acres, but I don't want to continue enrollment. Well, I can be unenrolled without developing the land. All right, so the lien doesn't become due. Nothing's developed. The lien isn't due until development happens. And I'll talk a little bit more about what the definition of development is. But it's just really important to remember. It's a contingent lien because the lien does not become due until the property is developed. Okay, so I can, again, to my example, I can be a farmer, I can unenroll my land and not have to pay the lien off. But when that land becomes developed, or any portion of that land becomes developed, the land use change tax becomes due. All right. It runs with the land as well. So if back to my example, if I'm a farmer and I've got a lien on my land, but I'm not enrolled, and Christie comes in and purchases that farm, then that obligation passes on to her. So if she were to decide to develop that farmland, then she would have to pay the land use change tax on it to remove the lien. And again, if the land use change tax becomes due, a real lien is recorded in the amount of the tax. And then if the land becomes due, you got to pay it within 30. If the land becomes developed and the lien becomes due, the owner has to pay that land use change tax within 30 days, or they're going to start accruing penalty and interest. Ineligible land. Yep, I promised we talk a little bit about withdrawals. We do a lot of them every year. Some of them are director actions and some of them are withdrawn by the landowner. And yeah, and this is probably an important point to make too. Current use staff here under PVR, we don't do site inspections. So we do use the parcel viewer, which some of you might know about and it might be talked about later in this training. So we can look at property, from a satellite image to kind of see what's going on, but we don't go out to the land. We don't go out to the property. I get this sometimes in appeals. Somebody will say, please, I know I transferred a couple of acres, but it's still being used as farmland, and will you come out and take a look at it? We don't have the capacity to go out and do. In that case, it wouldn't matter anyway, but we just don't have the capacity to go out and do on-site inspections. Also important for me to note, if you have a forest management plan, that means Forest Parks and Rec is involved. Forest Parks and Rec does do site inspections. So there's a little bit more monitoring happening with forest land than there is agricultural land. So ineligible land doesn't meet the qualifications for enrollment. So if it's less than 25 acres of forest land, and owner no longer a farmer, no longer actively used for active agricultural uses. If the forest management plan update wasn't submitted by the deadline, you can be unenrolled. Requested material not received within timeframes. If there's an adverse inspection of your forest land, like I said, Forest Parks and Rec does go out and do inspections. So if you receive an adverse inspection, then the land that was cut contrary, by cut contrary, it means you went out and cut the wood and you weren't supposed to cut the wood like that. That land would be considered developed. And then there are many more reasons for why land may be unenrolled as developed or not developed. Again, a lot of these are case-by-case basis. We do have rules and laws that we follow, but for me to kind of cover every single scenario in this training, it would take me longer than an hour. And then when land is unenrolled, again, I said this, but the tax isn't necessarily due. If it's unenrolled, is not developed, then the land use change tax is not due, but it is still calculated. All right, I'm kind of repeating myself here a little bit, but
Michael, can I just make a comment in here?
Please.
Just because I know we have some brand new listers out there, if you are panicking right now by all that's being said, you do not need to know as a lister all of these rules. As a matter of fact, I don't know all these rules. I don't want to know all these rules. I don't need to know all these rules. Neither do you. That's what the current use department is for. So if you're sitting there panicking, oh my God, I have to know all this, you don't. Okay. I just want to kind of, for people that got elected last week or earlier this week, I just want to kind of set their mind at ease a little bit because I think this can be super scary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's all I want
Yeah.
to say.
Yeah, and I hope I'm not being scary. And it is a whole lot. I'll go back to the beginning of my presentation here. I've been here for 6 months, and when they said I was giving a presentation in March, I said, "Oh my God!" I mean, it's a very large and very complex program. It's been redefined over the last few decades, so it is a lot. But I will add, we have an incredible team here in the office that can help you, that can help landowners through the process. So don't ever hesitate to call us or email us and ask a question. We want this to be easy for people. We want land enrolled into the program. All right. Thanks for that, Christy. I appreciate it. I think it was an important point to make. So land use change tax becomes due when it's developed. Withdrawal is not considered development. Development meets certain definitions. The land use change tax is 10% of the fair market value of the land as a separate parcel. Christy, are you guys going to talk more about this later or no?
Yes.
Okay, good. The municipality receives 50% up to $2,000 of the land use change tax that is collected. The lien release must be recorded before we authorize payment, and payments are done on a quarterly basis. So I talked a little bit about development. This is defined in statute. I get a lot of people who are withdrawn call me or email me and they say, hold on, I didn't develop anything. What are you saying that my land's developed for? I didn't build a house. I didn't, well, again, we're getting into the world of current use where we kind of have our own laws and rules and our own definitions for things. So let's talk quickly about what exactly is development. So a 2-acre house site for a dwelling, house, or mobile home, you have to have, if you have a dwelling, you have to have 2 acres around that dwelling. Okay. Dwelling is not defined, but it kind of comes down to what kind of utilities you got in the building. Is there a bed in it, etc. Again, we can kind of go into the weeds, but I'm going to keep us away from that. Creating a parcel less than 25 acres, except when the resulting parcel is eligible for enrollment and it was transferred to an immediate family member and they apply to continue enrollment. So let me give you an example of that one really quickly. If I've got 25 acres of forest land and I'm going to sell half of it to Deanna, then we've created 2 parcels that are less than 25 acres. Land use change tax becomes due on those 2 parcels. They're both defined as development because they're both less than 25 acres. The reason for that is because, part of the purpose of this program is we want to discourage parcelization, and the land use change tax was recreated, I think back in, somebody might have to correct me, but it was before 2020, I think, to really kind of punish people for developing and parcelizing land. If you cut contrary a portion of an adverse inspection, the cut contrary portion of an adverse inspection report. So if you, I'm repeating myself here, but if you go out and you cut a bunch of timber that you weren't supposed to cut, then that area is going to be considered developed. Construction of any buildings, roads, or other structure, or any mining, excavation, or landfill activity, unless the building, road, or other structure is used for farming, logging, forestry, or conservation purposes. So if I've got, you know, land enrolled in current use, and I decide that I want to put up an Airbnb or a sauna, or I want to build a gravel pit, or, well, that land's going to be considered developed. It's going to be unenrolled. And then agricultural land, water quality violation reported. I don't know what the acronym AAFM stands for. I'm speaking here for the specialists. I don't think we see a lot of these. So when a property is developed, this is the scenario. It's broken up into two parts. The notice of withdrawal and maps start with PVR, property valuation review. PVR requests the values of the changed land from the municipal assessing officials via myVTax web portals. So that's when you guys become involved, because we need you to go out and we need you to establish a fair market value on the developed land as a standalone parcel. The local assessing official value the changed land. Oh, okay, I said that already. Entered into myVTax, which divides this by the CLA to calculate fair market value. The local assessing official notifies the landowner via regular mail of their decision of the fair market value. Landowner has the appeal rights to the town of this valuation. Local assessing official submits valuation to PVR using myVTax. I am a working manager. One of the reasons for that is I handle appeals to withdrawals before they go to an assistant district attorney, and this comes up a lot. So it's important for you all to keep this in mind. When a property is withdrawn and the landowner disagrees with that, then the landowner really has two paths. They can appeal the withdrawal to the state, to PV&R, or they can grieve the value to the town. They have 30 days to appeal the withdrawal to the state. They have 14 days to appeal the fair market value to the town. And when that happens, we've current use kind of has to work side by side with the lister to figure out what the outcome is going to be. And by outcome, I don't mean we're not going to figure out what the fair market value is. That's totally up to you all. But we do have to update VTax and then kind of come to a resolution within the program. So land use change tax part 2. PV&R calculates land use change tax and notifies the landowner using regular mail. Again, the landowner has an appeal right to PVR's decision. If developed, payment is due within 30 days, or penalty and interest will accrue. If simply ineligible, tax is not due and P&I does not accrue. All right. So again, if you haven't developed the land, it's just ineligible. The tax is not due at that time. That's why we get into the world of contingent liens, contingent upon development. Once tax is paid, PV&R send lien release to town clerk via myVTax to be recorded, and then the town receives 50% up to $2,000 of the tax paid once the lien release once the lien release recording info is sent to the state. All right. I think we're right on time. I think we're gonna meet this one right all the way up to 10 o'clock. So again, we're using myVTax for withdrawals. It's part of the state's kind of integral. I mean, it's part of the state's transition into using VTax. It's our first step. We handle withdrawals and appeals there. Online portal for landowners to submit forms and tax payments. So landowners can create their own myVTax account, and then the listers should also have their own. So maps for now are still sent using regular mail, and then online portal for local assessing officials to enter the values. That's where you all have your hands in VTax for the reasons of current use. And then online portal for town clerks to record lien releases. Application recordings are still in eCuse. This is just an example of kind of what it would look like on your end. I replaced Elizabeth. She was here for over a decade as the current use section chief. I was lucky enough to kind of use some of pretty much her entire slide here. I'd made some edits, but that's the one nice thing about replacing a highly qualified individual. Their stuff is usually really squared away and good. eCuse, again, we've moved away from VTax and now we're talking about eCuse. This is where we accept online applications. You can see the link to the website there. Landowners can apply for new or changed enrollment on eCuse. Listers and town clerks can see applications that are under review and finalized. I believe the reason for that is so you can kind of get ahead of the game to do your part of the application process. And then town clerk uses to print application for recording and to enter recording information. Here's kind of a look at eCuse online application portal. We have to. I think we don't have a slide here, but I got a couple minutes to digress. But you know, current use is a part of the tax department, and we have to follow confidentiality laws. So if you ever get frustrated with us because we're not sharing information with you on a specific current use application or withdrawal, you know, we do apologize. They threaten us with some really scary stuff and jail time and all that. So we can be a little reluctant to give information out sometimes. It's nothing against you. It's just out of fear and respect for people's private information. And then here's our contact information, current use program, got our phone number there. We've got our kind of email address for all and any questions. We've got the tax department's website, eCuse link, and then myVTax link. And that's it. I know that's a big one. We can all probably take a deep breath and try to digest some of that. I saw a lot of activity in the chat, but Christy, Deanna, if you guys think that I should open up for questions, I'm happy to do so, and I'll do my best to answer them. But if not, I'm happy to let you guys take it away.
I think folks would be happy if you answered some questions now, and
Okay.
we'll just cut it off if we need to get going.
Okay.
Michael, were you going to plan to hang out for the rest of our training today and tomorrow for questions that might pop up, or maybe we could just suggest that they email their additional questions or more specific questions to their current use specialist later?
Yeah, I'm going to hang out. I'm going to be here for the entire thing.
All right, and then you too could serve as a lister in your community.
Oh my God. Yeah. You know what? I think I took this. Well, I know I did. I took this training way back when I was a young town manager in Proctor. I might even still have my certificate, but I could use a refresher.
All right. So Terry, you were going to do questions, or would you like me to do that? Looks like we have a couple hands up.
Doesn't matter. What would
Okay.
you prefer?
Go for it. Thank you.
Okay. Jen put her hand down, so I guess she doesn't need anything. Oh, it's up. So Jen, you have a question? Let me change you so you can unmute. Now you can unmute and ask your question.
Hi, I can turn my camera on so you can see me too. I am wondering, first of all, have you stopped, oh, I guess my camera's not on. Anyway, have you stopped requesting new applications for owners that transfer to trusts or life estates, any type of, where their ownership really hasn't changed ownership to, I know that we were being requested to do the whole process of land use change tax, and then we have 3 listers in our town. All they do is hear grievances. I had to put them on alert that there might be a grievance. So I'm just curious, do you just automatically accept that in-house, or are you making the homeowners apply for a new application, causing possibly them getting it in late, and then I guess that's what it was, getting it in late and then not getting.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, we're not super incredibly strict on our 30-day deadline. Now, if you get up to December 31st and haven't gotten the information we need, then that has been a very hard line. We've got to make a decision to approve an application or withdrawal. But to answer your question, it's something that we cannot get around. If property transfers to a trust or the trust changes, then we do require a new application.
I have a request for somehow getting the legislation to change the 30-day notice to owners. It would be awesome if there was a way we could just do the grievance process through our regular grievance schedule. But I understand that's legislation right now. When we get a land use change tax request, we have 30 days to get that notice to the homeowner. I believe that's correct, 30 days. And then they have the 14 days to grieve. Again, that it's just added work for our office.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a way to get that changed, that would be great. And I'm not sure how that would work, but it's.
We are definitely doing our best to make the workload a little less on listers. I mean, we have to be a bit agnostic just because we're state employees, but I know there has been and I'm not saying I support it or not, but it would make a lister's life easier, I believe, as I know there's a lot of talk of the legislature right now of going back to whether it happened, I don't know, but going back to the prorated land use change tax methodology, where you don't have to go out every time someone is considered developed. It would just be a prorated, and for those of you that have been around long enough, you may remember, but the withdrawals based, the land use change taxes is just based off of the fair market value of the property at that time, and then the percentage of the property that was withdrawn. So there, I promise there's always an effort to make everybody's life easier. But again, a lot of different interests with current use.
Thank you.
Okay. And then we have Londonderry. Jeremiah, you can unmute?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm I'm just wondering if there's a process. What I'm getting now is sometimes new owners in the land use program, they've acquired property and they really don't have a real good understanding of this, and then they put in a building permit application, right? And then they actually improve on enrolled land. And by the time I get the knowledge of that, it could have happened after April 1st. And then they've already gone through and developed. And then everyone gets into this. Well, it just could be potentially avoided if somehow that was triggered when a building permit on a land use property was filed, that someone could just overview that. I guess it's not really a question, but I don't know if anyone has a mechanism in which they're able to try to nip this in the butt before it gets to penalties and fair market value and everything. Because a lot of people don't understand the program at all. They just understand the tax benefit of the program.
Mhm.
And yeah, so. So I just don't know if it's best to talk to zoning administrators when these permits get applied. That's what I've been trying to do, is like talk to my zoning and say, hey, look, when these get applied, like maybe just a cursory review of the plan, and then everyone's on the same page.
Mhm. Yeah, we often kind of have to fall back to the rule that, it's a landowner's responsibility. They're receiving the benefits. It's their responsibility to kind of understand the program and report any changes to us. And sometimes, but I respect your opinion there. A lot of times, so if it's a forested area, we'll be alerted by a forester, a county forester, or a landowner will withdraw the land. They know the rules, or a lister will reach out to us and say, hey, this person has put up a new building. We think it needs to be withdrawn.
But our response is to let our current use specialist know, like not to let the county forester know, right? Like would you suggest that we reach out to our specialist? Is that how you want the flow of information to go?
Yeah, that would be the right thing to do. Reach out to the specialist.
Can everyone see my slides okay?
I can see
can,
it
so
fine.
it looks good.
Yeah.
Okay. And Michael, we tagged you in on this section too, just in case we run into any hiccups and need you to chime in. So thank you for hanging out with us. All right, so you will notice on these slides in the top right-hand side, there will be a box that tells you which page of the document we are on. So hopefully that will help you locate where we are if you happen to get lost or have to step away for a moment. So we're going to start today with a brief explanation of current use, which Michael has done a wonderful job of explaining to us in depth. Your course document has some pared down information, but ultimately what we're looking to communicate with you today is that current use is a property tax benefit program for working lands in active agricultural managed forest land and conservation land. Most enrollments must have a minimum of 25 acres to enroll. Some small agricultural parcels may qualify by special income criteria or lease, or all of the other fun ways that Michael described a moment ago. Enrolled land is taxed at its use value, often a significant reduction in value. In return for this benefit, a contingent lien is placed on the parcel, and Michael described that contingent lien. Anything to add here, Christy?
I think most importantly, and for folks that are brand new listers, I just want to reiterate, don't panic. For you as a lister, all you really need to understand is that the program exists, that it's a lien on the property in exchange for certifying that you're using your property for certain purposes, including agricultural, conservation, and or forest land, and it can be a combination of all those. And if you have kind of that basic knowledge, and then where to find the application and the number to current use department, that's really all you need to know in the back of your mind. Then what we're going to talk about is how you're going to go about and apply the implication of this program once someone is in the program. But in terms of understanding all the background of the program, you don't have to. And I actually would encourage you not to try to tell a landowner what the rules are, because they change frequently. There's a lot of nuances and caveats to all these rules, right, that you might not know. So you certainly wouldn't want to say something to someone that wasn't correct and prevented them from being in the program when in fact they could have. So I think your best answer is always to say, listen, here's the program, here's where you can access it online, here's the phone number. I really don't know all the rules, so I suggest you get in contact with them and ask the questions that you need. And leave it at that.
I think that's very fair. I personally like to know how things work, but I understand that it's nearly impossible for us to keep on top of that along with all of our lister and DA duties. So just keep that in mind. All right. So use values, as Michael said, are established by the Current Use Advisory Board annually. Use values are set each year for each program. That's the agricultural, the forest, and the conservation, and then multiplied by the town's common level of assessment. In 2025, these use values, again, as Michael stated, are agricultural at $510 per acre, forest, non-productive forest, and conservation at $203 per acre, and forest, non-productive forest, and conservation greater than a mile at $152 per acre.
So again, speaking to folks that might be new here, I would just point out that why this is important is the use values, which are set every year, is the amount that taxpayer is actually going to pay on if they've enrolled in this program, rather than the full assessment that you have for that property. So on that agricultural land, for example, if you have $1,200 an acre, right, and that person's enrolled, they're going to pay on the 510, not the 1,200. So that's the piece that we're going to dig into and show you how mathematically you're going to apply that for taxpayers within your grand list. And so these are the numbers that they're going to actually pay on their tax bill for the land that's enrolled.
All right. Okay. So processes for listers. When and how do listers process their current use? So we say prior to April 1st, but really, this is something that you want to keep in mind throughout the year, and particularly as you're starting to get ready to lodge, or for those new current use applications to be coming to you, which should be, I believe, mid-March. And we're almost there. It is important to keep notes of any parcel transfer or changes that affect a current use parcel. These notes should be entered into your very first current use parcel exchange so that the current use office can begin corresponding with the landowners as soon as possible should new applications or maps be required. So as Michael said earlier, if the PTTR is filled out correctly and the attorney or one of their staff members checks the box that they wish to continue in current use, current use is not going to follow up on that. Is that a fair statement, Michael? Because they're expecting them to continue? Or no, you would be sending an application in that instance.
Yeah, if the PTTR is checked incorrectly, it kind of screws things up. So we're alerted to a transfer if section G is filled out correctly on the PTTR.
Okay. So we know that PTTRs are rife with errors. So in my opinion, and I hope Christy would agree, that the more information that we can include in that exchange with current use staff, so that they can see it as soon as possible, will help us get those applications and letters out, and hopefully get a quick return so we can try and wrap up our work as early as possible. So some examples of activity that should be noted would be transfers to a new owner, subdivision or purchase of an abutting parcel, additions or removal of a co-owner, life estates and trusts, and tax and survey map changes. Anything to add there, Christy?
So again, just speaking to folks that might be new listers, what we're talking about here is what we call the current use exchange or the current use module. That's part of your grand list maintenance where you're going to see everyone that's enrolled in current use. And we're going to ask you to provide us not only values, which we'll get into, but any information that may have changed that parcel. So for example, Deanna had 150 acres last year that was enrolled in the agricultural program, and she sold 50 acres to me. That's going to change not only her assessment, but also her enrollment. So they need to fill out a new application if they haven't. Michael's office then needs to process that, and we need to get a new value in place for that. Okay, so anything that changes or affects a current use parcel, we need to know about, which is why we start this, what we call exchange, early on in the year, so that we can get any information that's happened that we didn't catch up to from the property transfers, and any new information that you have about different things that we might not have. So we let you know in March. It'll probably be out in a week or so. And we encourage you to start the first piece as soon as you possibly can, knowing that you still might have subsequent changes, right? So it's okay to start working on that module and then have subsequent changes after the fact. But we want to get it moving as quickly as we can. So if there were letters that Michael's office needs to get out to say, okay, Deanna, you transferred this property and you didn't tell us, you got to now give us a new application and a new map. Those are the kinds of things that hold the process up. So we want to get them moving as quickly as we possibly can.
Absolutely. I think I see a question in the chat. Maybe this is a good time. Terry, did you want to read that? From Gina.
Gina, so how would you like that information sent to you? Would you like each time we get a PTTR with the change?
I guess that's a question for Michael, because in the past, we've said we only want it through this exchange because we get a lot of it through the PTTRs. But I guess I would ask Michael if he also would like towns to email or anything else.
Sometimes I like a little bit of time to think on a question, so I think
Okay.
that would be one of them.
Okay. I think what we're trying to do is capture most of it through the property transfer. So ideally, I think if you happen to see that nothing's on the property transfer noted that it's in current use, that might be a time that you point it out to us. That's how we're typically trying to capture it and how we capture most of them, but we can't possibly get them all because not everybody fills in that box.
Yeah, and it's a lot cleaner for us too if we're just following the PTTR. I mean, don't get me wrong, we have listers that do reach out to us because sometimes we'll receive an LB 314, which is a withdrawal form from the landowner, and then we'll go look for their PTTR and it's not there. And the lister will say, oh yeah, it transferred or it's about to transfer. And it just kind of muddies the water a little bit. So if we kind of have one process to go by, it's more efficient on our end.
And there are some tools built into the VTPIE program. For instance, if you change the acreage, it's going to force you to provide a comment, and that's also going to force a review by a current use specialist. So that program is completely appropriate to communicate with your current use staff member. Is that an appropriate statement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I forget about VTPIE. Yeah, VTPIE is kind of part of the picture. So
yes, and we will actually, during the course of this 2-morning process, take you out into the VTPIE program to show you where exactly we will do that. So the beginning is more of an overview, but we'll get into the nitty gritty, the nuts and bolts as we continue through. All right.
And
So
that's it for
moving,
questions.
okay, thank you, Terry. So moving on, we're going to talk about the current use process. The initial current use parcels are typically available in your VTPIE in the middle of March every year. The earlier listers review, verify, and save all initial current use files. The sooner the files can be certified. And by certified, we also mean completed, state certified. There are different terminologies that we use, but essentially our goal here is to get it back to the state current use folks so that they can have any final review that's necessary and deem it complete for the year. That makes all of our lives a lot easier when we can do that sooner than later. This practice also helps reduce the need for issuing updated tax bills. It's important to check in VTPIE for current use parcels in your work queue that we'll show you in a bit on a regular schedule, preferably weekly, when you check for homesteads. This process is intended to be an ongoing exchange and completed multiple times until all parcels are considered complete or certified. Christy?
Yeah, so this is kind of what I was alluding to, that you don't have to panic if you didn't get everything right the first time out of the gates. You go through each parcel and then something changes. It's okay. You're going to have multiple chances to get all of the parcels perfected. And we'll kind of show you what we mean by all of that and how we're going to break down those values for taxability. That's the piece that we're going to show you. We're going to show you how to enter it in VTPIE. We're going to show you how to calculate it and how to do it according to statute, which is most important, and how to notify folks of those pieces parts, or what we call the allocation of value that ends up to the taxable piece. All right, it's where they get the exemption for being in the program. So we're going to walk you through all of that.
Absolutely. All right, so this is our cyclical process that we will refer to several times. So we'd like to give you this visual diagram. Most often, and I think best practice in our opinion, is to always start this process with an upload of your CAMA data from your CAMA program or NEMRIC into the VTPIE program. The key here being that once you send it from your CAMA or the NEMRIC program, you must then go to VTPIE to receive it.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just kind of hanging out there. Step 2 would be to review and process homestead declarations, and you'll see a couple asterisks there. The reason those asterisks are there in your document on page 2 at the very bottom, you'll see in bold and italics font. It is important to remember that any adjustment to real value, homestead, or house site value after a CAMA upload has been done subsequently will require another upload to true up that data. So for example, if you get a homestead declaration that has an additional building that's going to be deemed as business use, that's going to change your allocation a little bit. And we need to true up that information with VTPIE so that you can do the remainder of your work. So then we're going to edit the parcels in your work list and others as needed, that work list being your current use queue in the VTPIE program. Once we're done, there is a nice, pretty save and verify parcel button at the very bottom, and that effectively returns it to the current use staff so they know that you have done what you need to do. Then we're going to download the verified parcels to billing. Again, once you send something out of one program, you need to go to the other program to receive it. So if you are going to continue to bill with the NEMRIC program or any other, you'll want to receive that billing download from VTPIE into that program. And then we want you to reconcile your NEMRIC 411 report to the current use all parcel report. Christy, would you like to explain some of these steps a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think that some of the pieces that are kind of missing, and the way that I like to think of it in my mind is I'm kind of batting a tennis ball back and forth, right? So CAMA, when we say CAMA, we mean where you get your values. That might be for you Microsoft, Patriot, ProVal, Vision, right? Those are some CAMA systems. That's where you go into to create or change your value. You also will go in there to change name, ownership, acreage, etc. Whether you do it through NEMRIC indirectly or not, you're still changing details. Every time you change a detail, you need to upload it into the VTPIE system. So what Deanna's saying is, get all those pieces right, including homestead changes if they're needed, then do your upload so that when you sit down to break down all the pieces parts, you have a cost sheet in front of you that is current, reflecting everything that might have changed, and those same numbers are on the screen right in front of you. Okay, that's our best case scenario where we need to start attributing pieces of value and everything is matching, right? And then we're going to go through, attribute all those pieces, which we're going to show you. And then the last piece is, now I've got all those exemptions in place. I want to send it to billing, which for 98% of you is going to be sending it back to NIMRIC. Okay, so I've batted that ball again, and then I need to go into NIMRIC and receive it. So the way I put it in my brain is every time I send something, I've got to go get it somewhere else. Send, receive, send, receive. And this, we're just going to keep going round and round until sometime in the fall, right? We have completed and certified every single parcel. We've set them up for billing, and as far as we know, everything is accurate and we've checked both sides.
Absolutely. All right, so now let's talk about the screens that you will see in the VTPIE program when we're going in to look at this fun process. So the key here, this is the first year in VTPIE that you will have multiple years that you have been working in. So we want to make sure that the drop-down menu that shows at the top of your screen, again, we'll demo this for you in a bit, that it says 2025, because that is where we're going to be doing our work. 2024 is closed. You won't be able to do much in there, but you can certainly still go and see the information. Once you're firmly in 2025 in VTPIE, your dashboard looks like the snip that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. And I apologize, my little yellow box is a little bit off. We're going to be looking in the tax programs module, and you can see where this arrow is pointing that in this particular instance, there is one local verification that has not been completed. When you get this, it should say 0 verifications have been completed in your work queue. Christy?
Yeah, so this is just kind of your dashboard to keep track of, to check and make sure that you can look at this and see, oh, do I have more to verify? And then I can go in further. And this is kind of like where you launch the program. So this is just your dashboard, your main dashboard in VTPIE. This is where you would be launching and checking to see how many you've verified compared to how many you have.
Yes. All right, and then once you click on that tax programs button, it will open up another menu for you. It will have your homesteads that were discussed in a previous training and current use, and it actually also now has exemptions as another item here. But for today, we're focusing on the current use portion. And once you click on that current use button, it'll open the work queue or the work list that we will talk about or will reference throughout. That will look like a list of parcels. This one just happens to have multiple barns, family parcels. And you would be able to click on any one of those to open up that record. Christy, anything to add there?
Nope, I
There
think you
is
got
a
it.
question.
Okay, thank you, Terry.
Yep. Can data be downloaded from VTPIE? I am a proficient coder and could write code to check my work and flag issues. So I would say at this time, there may be reports you'll be able to run, but you would have to talk to your DA if you need help with that at this point.
Yeah, I think you'd have to talk with VTPIE support if you want to do exporting and do something that way, because that's not our jam.
All right, was that the only question, Terry?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so moving on, when you do click on one of those parcels in your list, this is the screen that will pop up for you, minus the green numbered bubbles. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk through the pieces of information that we need for you to be conscious of and to review. Christy?
So when you're looking at this screen, the left-hand side, as you can see, is your grand list information. Okay. The middle portion is what PVR current use has for information on the enrollment status. So we're starting out by looking to see if those are the same, right? And then also more status and accounts on the right-hand side, more information about that parcel, okay? So we're going to take you through the pieces that you really need to check and make sure that we're matching, make sure that we're right, and we're good to go on each parcel.
All right.
So
and
go ahead.
I was going to say our next slide, we actually break each of these numbers
Yep.
down for you. So the next
Yep.
slide, we're going to check the CLA.
Okay, so in that very left-hand column, the very first thing before you do any current use at all is you want to check to see what it says under that CLA box when you open a parcel, because this should be the CLA that was certified to you in January, okay? Part of the equalization study, we certify the common level of appraisal for each town. If you don't know where to find it, someone else in your office should know where to find that information, or we can help you to find it. And the reason that you want to make sure that this is absolutely correct is because, as Michael mentioned, the acreage times the use value times the CLA is the calculation for the amount they're going to pay on. Okay, so if this is an error, all of our numbers and therefore taxability is going to be wrong. So right out of the gates, this is the most important piece to check and make sure it's right. If it's not, put the brakes on, call us, and we'll get it fixed. Something has gone awry. And then the next piece of this is, if you are a reappraisal town for 2025, meaning you are finishing your reappraisal in 2025, values are going to be as of April 1, 2025, all anew, then that number should be 1.0. That should be the CLA applied, because we're assuming that you're completing your reappraisal and we want to apply 100% CLA.
So in the event that this number is wrong, reach out to your DA.
Please, as soon as possible, and put the brakes on before you do any more work, because we want to get it fixed.
Okay, so the question I have now is, I received a corrective LV 314 to correct how the acreage was supposed to be divided up and valued. First time one way, this time a different way. I have done a corrective LV 314 before, but my CLA was the same both times. This time I have different CLAs from the original. Which CLA do I use for the correction? The same CLA as the first one, or the CLA at the time I received this LV 314?
Do you want to take that one, Christy?
So I'm going to say a couple of things. One, call current use, get it clarified with them, because it really depends on when the withdrawal was. And two, let's hold off on any LV 314 questions, because that's really a totally separate process. What we're talking about is enrolled parcels active for this year that we're walking through. When you talk about LV 314, you're talking about when someone removes property from the program, and that's a different process. So I don't want to get people confused. Okay?
And we'll be talking about it later?
Yes, at the very end, if we have time. If we don't, we'll create another session for it.
So
Okay.
I also see a question or a comment in here about the new CLA calculation. The important part here is that separate from what the tax bill shows and separate from what your school boards are going to use for a CLA for their estimates, this process in VTPIE is going to utilize the CLA that was certified to you by PVR at the end of December or early January. Is that correct, Christy?
That is absolutely correct.
All right, so moving on to bobble number 2 for ownership grand list versus current use account holder.
So first we want to know, is this the correct record that we're looking at? Does current use have the same parcel that we have? Do they have the same ownership that we have, right? If the name is a little bit off, you can let them know, although they may have to keep it the same because of the way the application and the lien is reading. But if it's totally wrong person, more people, you have it in trust, you have it owned differently, you need to let us know, right? Because that's a scenario where Michael's office is going to have to dig in and say, okay, well, did they transfer it? And we need to get a new application, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that you would certainly need to let us know. If it's not matching, what you would want to do is you would want to type in what's called a question, and you can see it in blue there, right above where it says enrolled. We can, and we'll show you a little bit more in detail later, but you can type in a question to say, to Michael's department to say, we believe this is owned by Timothy now, and Mary no longer owns this parcel.
Mm-hmm. And
For example.
Yeah, even so far as new deed and PTTR were received on X date, so that they can easily go into the VTPIE program and identify or locate that transfer.
Yep.
Michael, is that helpful?
Yeah, sorry, I got distracted there for a second.
No, that's okay. Just saying that if we are going, a lister is going to notify you that the ownership has changed somehow, that if they can give you how it's changed and when it changed
Yes,
in the questions. Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
most definitely helpful.
Okay.
And then if it's a totally different parcel, you can see where it says span there, and it looks like it's blue and it looks like it has a little link there. In fact, it does. It links to the mapping and to the parcel itself. So what you can do, if it's wrong, you can click on where it says property. And again, we'll show you this in more detail. You can click on where it says property right above enrolled as well, and you can link it to the correct parcel in your grand list if it's not linked to the right one. Am I saying that correctly, Deanna?
That's exactly correct.
Yes.
So then number 3 is making sure that the span number that PVR has, or that current use has, is the same as what your grand list is showing. Christy, comments on the span number?
So oftentimes it is part of what I was just referring to. If the span number doesn't appear correct, it could be that it's linking to the wrong parcel. So maybe we just need to relink it. Maybe it's totally wrong and we're not sure and we need to then pose a question. There's a couple of different scenarios that could come in here. But oftentimes span is linked to parcel number and therefore name. And so it kind of, we either need to relink it or we need to ask a question and figure out what the problem is.
Definitely. Number 4 is just directing you to that question tab that Christy was just mentioning. And we also provided a snip of the screen that pops up when you do click on that question. So it will require, you can, search your questions if you have a slew of questions on a property. I don't imagine anybody has too many of these just yet, since we've only been in the program for a few years. But you would then click the green button that says add in the bottom right hand side of the pop-up screen. So do we have, oh no, which will provide a box for you to type in. Unlike lister responses, I hope you're happy to know, though maybe to current uses despair, it is not a limited character field. So I wouldn't say give them the whole soap opera story of the transaction, but enough information that they know what you're trying to relay clearly. Anything there, Christy?
I would just add, when in doubt and you're not sure what to do on a parcel, either call your DA or call one of the current use advisors. They can help you if it's a question about eligibility or if it's the right person. We can help you as far as values and how to operate the system generally and breaking all that down. So just kind of knowing where you can reach out if you get stuck.
All right, and I will, before we start talking about this slide too much, I just wanted to put a note out there that there is an error in your document. A lot of baubles to organize here on this screen, and I did make a mistake. So at the top of your screen, or on your the top of page 6, bauble H should be bauble I, and bauble I should be bauble J. And we'll talk about all of these just as we have on the last section. All right, so the first item that we want to pay attention to here is acreage. Christy?
So what you're going to want to do is look at the total acreage here that current use has, and does it in fact match what you're listing that parcel for and what you're valuing that parcel for. As we know, when we look at NIMRIC, there's a place to record acreage, and then there's your cost sheet, which has acreage that you're valuing on. Sometimes those two things can be askew. So which one's correct? Which one am I valuing? And sometimes this will lead you to say, oh, I got a little discrepancy I need to fix. Now, having said that, you don't want to match current use acreage. In other words, current use is not a survey. So we're not going to change our acreage to make it match. We're going to say, okay, something's not right here. Is it that I had a mapping change and I just need current use to adjust to mine, right? Or did they in fact add something to the property and I need to have current use adjusted? Or did they subtract something from the property? Either way, I've got to check this and kind of sleuth it out if there's a difference as to why the acreage might not be the same.
All right, so Christy did mention a couple of these, but some examples of why acreage might not match would be, did the owner purchase additional contiguous land? Did they sell off a portion of their land? Did the town map show a different acreage? Or you've had your tax maps updated and you update based on that information? And did you forget to update the NEMRIC acreage for a recent change and upload from NEMRIC CAMA to VTPIE?
And so it kind of in your document on page 7, it kind of takes you through each of these scenarios. So if the owner did purchase contiguous land and you don't see that it's been changed and there's any new application or any new enrolled land, then what you're going to want to do is add that extra land to the excluded portion. In other words, not enrolled, that's what excluded means, of the acreage piece. Because on every parcel before we proceed, we have to be matching. So we're going to need to force it to match by allocating more acreage. Okay, so if they added acreage and I don't yet have or don't have anywhere showing that they filled out a new application for that extra acreage, then I want to add it to the excluded portion. If they sell off some of their land, again, same thing. They sold off, acreage isn't matching, and I don't have a revised application, then I need to take it out of one of those portions. If I know where it is, fine. If I don't, I'm going to take it out, and current use might change where I took it from when they do more investigation. Okay, but I've got to be able to proceed. And then the last one is if your map is showing different and you've adjusted your acreage according to your mapping, then again, we need to add acreage. If we know where it is, we're going to add it in the, agricultural or whatever. If we don't, we're going to take our best guess, and current use might then change that allocation later on. And we're always going to put in notes when we change acreage. Okay.
Right. So moving on, let's talk about bauble B, which is your total listed value. Christy?
So the total listed value here in the overview box should be exactly what you're seeing on your most recent cost sheet. If for some reason it isn't, that's where we talk about that batting of the ball back and forth. If I've made a change in my CAMA, my value system, and I haven't uploaded it here, then I'm not going to see the same number. So this is clearly a stop sign to say, whoa, wait a minute. I got to be matching before I can start putting in the pieces, right? So if this is not matching what you have in CAMA, And what you have on that cost sheet, you got to go back to CAMA and probably check, make sure which is right, and then do a new CAMA upload, because we've got to get things matching before we start.
Absolutely. One comment that I get regularly from new listers is, how did current use come up with the value in the total listed value valuation tab? The answer is they did not. These values are rolled over from whatever was entered in the prior year. So if those numbers are different, that means that you may have had a building added, some improvements, or something detracted from the property that you then need to account for.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I have, Christy, I pretty much answered it, but we have a landowner who recently made his 2 properties contiguous, changing the span number of the land that's in current use. There are no changes other than that. Would you use the property link to change this? Property link.
I think the question is, where did the land go? So you said it was contiguous. Did they add it to their main parcel that was already in current use? If so, then I just need to adjust that parcel and leave a note to the current use staff on both of those parcels, right? That it's now combined with parcel number 001, and I've reflected the changes here, etc.
And where's the other one? If owner wants to add to current use land, how long would PVR review take? That would be for Michael or one of the techs.
Yeah, what was the question? How long would an application take?
If somebody were to add land to their existing property, how long would PVR review take?
It's variable.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best answer I can give, unfortunately.
Yeah. So it's pretty much a minimum of the 30-day letter that
Correct.
goes out.
Yeah. 30 days from when the time we find out. So if we don't find out from you until May, and then we have to send a 30-day letter, and then we still don't get it, I think we send them another reminder. So it can take some time. Now, having said that, your job is to process things the way they are the day you do it, right? We're going to get it done the way I know it to be right now. And then if Michael sends me changes in a month, then I'm going to go back in and fix it. So it's that circular motion that we're doing where we're working through these over and over again, which may mean that some of them change 3 and 4 times.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And I would imagine,
and it depends on the quality of the application too.
Yep.
certainly, I would imagine that there are some enrollments that are much easier than others. So,
Yep.
Mhm.
okay, that's it.
thank you, Terry and Michael. All right, so reconciliation of errors and inconsistencies. And again, in your document, if you're following along, we're on page 7. So we have homestead and non-homestead flags. So homestead is if the owner is a resident and has filed a homestead declaration. By law in the state of Vermont, if you own a property and you are domiciled there, then you must file a homestead declaration. Non-homestead is if the owner has not filed a homestead declaration yet and or is not a resident. So we do not assume a property is a homestead property. It should be entered to match the grand list flag as it exists when you verify, as Christy just mentioned. Again, for emphasis, listers must wait for that homestead download to reflect owner's filing status as homestead and must update current use files once that homestead is received or rescinded. Christy?
Yeah, so this is where when we were talking about that circular motion, we said one of those very preliminary steps each time is not only to do your CAMA upload, but to also do your homesteads so that we have the most recent information. So if I sit down to do my values, I'm doing it as of today. Whoever is a homestead as of today, that's the way I'm going to do their breakdown. If they have not yet declared, then they're going to be non-homestead. I'm still going to process it. I'm going to go all through the process. And then if next month Michael's office sends me another file and it has them as homestead, I'm going to go back in and have to align those into the homestead column. Sounds like a lot of work. It's actually not. And I'm going to fix it because they've now declared a homestead.
Right. So if you have previously verified a parcel and they had not at that moment in time filed their homestead declaration, you come in next week or next month and that declaration comes through, that record is going to recognize something's different here and it's going to repopulate in your work list. So it's not something that you're going to have to track down on your own, which could be super cumbersome.
Yep.
Any questions on that, Terry?
It's a domiciled full-time or a portion of the year.
The
And
domicile rule is a very long document that you can find on our website. I believe it was last amended in 2004. So you can imagine that both the homestead rule and the domicile rule have had statute changes and, case law changes. So take that with a grain of salt. But ultimately, if the taxpayer swears under pains of, pains and penalty of perjury that this is their domicile, whether they are snowbirds or on a sabbatical or in the military, then we take that homestead declaration. If you have reason to question that homestead, as was covered in the homestead declaration training, then you would file a response to taxpayer services via lister response, but that's a separate process.
And how would you, oops, sorry.
I was just asking if that answered the question.
And the other question is, how would you know a homestead has been rescinded?
A homestead would be rescinded you would know that in the same way that you would know one has been filed. On a weekly basis, taxpayer services communicates to VTPIE that a change has happened. So there are 3 types of homestead filings. There's an add, there's a change, and there's a delete. And you would see that pop up in your homestead work queue. If it's rescinded, it will also bring that parcel back for your review in the current use file.
Correct. So if it shows in your work queue the following week, then there's something's changed on that parcel and you're going to go back in and see what it is, which could be a homestead flag on or off.
All right. Are we caught up on the questions?
We are.
Perfect. Thank you, Terry. All right. So now let's talk about that homestead total listed value. Christy?
So you're going to also see in the current use in VTPIE a homestead value. This homestead value should be, again, the same number that exists for homestead in your CAMA system and on the cost sheet that you're looking at. If not, again, we got to go back to our CAMA and figure out why it's not the same. And we may have to do a new CAMA upload. This is always our starting place. Are my numbers matching? I can't go ahead and do pieces parts if my beginning numbers are not matching. So I've got to really check that. Is the listed value matching? Is the homestead value matching?
And the program is set up in such a way that if the homestead value that you see in the overview box at the top of your screen does not match the total listed value at the bottom of your valuation screen, you'll get a red banner at the top of your page that says something's wrong here. Go back in and check your numbers. You do that too many times, it can become a frustrating process. Your DA is more than welcome to take a look. We can see all of the current use parcels that you can see, and we might be able to help you identify where the numbers might be out of sync.
Yep.
And then we have the non-homestead total listed value. Christy?
Right, so same idea is the non-homestead, and of course you don't see non-homestead on your cost sheet specifically, but non-homestead is always your total listed value minus your homestead. Okay, so when I look at my listed value and I subtract my homestead, is that what's showing in my non-homestead? Okay, and is that the same? Are those all the same as what I do see on my cost sheet and in my CAMA?
Right. So the important part here, as Christy said, so if you have $20,000 of non-homestead value, then the number above that in this scenario would have reduced that homestead value by 20,000. So that number would have become 444,100.
Yep.
If there is a homestead filed on the property, and you have a number here in this non-homestead value, that means you must also have a non-homestead value in the right-hand column here.
Yes.
Again, the homestead declaration, we talked about how you know when they're filed, so you'll see those in your homestead work queue, but you will also see that noticed here for Bobble E where homestead filed, it will say yes. And I believe now it also tells you the date that it was filed. But if there is no homestead declaration on file, that will say no. And everything will show up in your non-homestead column. Anything there, Christy?
Nothing to add.
Okay. So now let's talk about the portion of the program that works in the background. We're going to talk about the use value.
So again, I'll say it one more time because I think it's so important. The use value is what the taxpayer is going to pay on per acre for the land that's enrolled instead of paying on the assessment that you have on that same acreage. Okay, so they're paying on a reduced amount in exchange for having that lien on their property that Michael talked about. Okay, so that is what we call use value, and that's what they're going to be taxed on for those acres. And again, it's the number of acres in the program times the use value that's set each year for those acreage, be it agricultural, forest, or conservation, times the common level of appraisal. So good for you to know how that's calculated. You don't have to do the math. It automatically shows up within your system. But for me, it's always good to know how the math pieces break down because you're inevitably going to have to walk through it with taxpayers.
Okay. All right, so then we also have the owner's taxable value that shows on the same screen. Christy?
So these, and we're going to take you through all these pieces parts several times, but this is all the pieces that add up to what that person will be taxed on. So in this example, just to kind of walk you through, and if you're not quite there yet, it's okay because we'll walk through it many times. The person always pays full value on their dwelling and non-enrolled farm buildings. They always pay full value on excluded land. And then they pay use value on the amount that they have enrolled in the program rather than the enrolled. So in this example, $319,500 plus $95,800 plus the use value of $10,900 will get you to their taxable amount of $426,200. Does anybody need me to say that again? We'll go through it in examples many, many times.
Definitely. And then the last number that we have for discussion is the exempt reduction.
So this is the amount that their benefit or the amount that they don't pay on. So the exempt reduction is going to be the enrolled land that you say is worth a certain amount. In this case, it's $48,800. The town is saying the enrolled land, the land enrolled in the program, is assessed at or worth $48,800, right? And they're going to pay on the use value rather than that $48,800. So they're going to pay on $10,900. So if you take $48,800 and you subtract what they're actually paying on, $10,900, their exempt reduction is $37,900, or their benefit for being in the program.
Right. Yep. And Michael showed you a snip of a tax bill, some of our favorite documents as taxpayers in the state of Vermont, and he showed you where that would show up. I think we also show that again towards the end of our class.
Yes, this will be the amount that's going to be downloaded. We call it downloaded into your billing to subtract from their tax bill to leave them with that owner's taxable value.
And again, it sounds really overwhelming. That's not our intention. This is just a general overview, and we really will get into the nuts and bolts of how we do this with some extensive examples that will make us all experts by the end of tomorrow.
Yep.
So
We hope.
I have a comment, or listed, total listed value minus exempt reduction.
To find the owner's taxable value, that would be a fair
Yeah.
statement.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct
Yep.
statement.
Yep.
Yes.
All right.
Okay,
And
that's good.
that brings us to the owner's taxable value, which we've covered. So let's go on to, oh, why am I going backwards? Hold on.
I think
just
you
a
are.
minute.
Yes.
All right. He's
That was
saying,
fun.
Gene is also saying if enrolled, if enrolled.
I
don't know.
believe that is in response to Justin's question about farm buildings, which we will talk about later. So the farm
Yeah.
buildings are only tax exempt for 100% of their value if they are enrolled. And again, we'll cover the farm buildings in a bit.
Correct. Yep.
All right. So the land value in the overview box, what this slide is showing for you, and as is described on page 8 of your document. The key here is to be sure so that when you click the verify button that you don't get the red banner that tells you it's wrong. A part of that is that the land value in this box must equal the excluded land plus the enrolled land. Christy, do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think this is why it's important for me to have the cost sheet in front of me, so that as I'm doing these pieces, I can be literally highlighting the pieces on the cost sheet and making sure that I've got all the pieces. And I think that will really help you at the end of the day.
I'm definitely a fan of paper and pencil. It really helps to work through these problems, especially with the more intricate parcels that have a lot of land and a lot of buildings.
Yep. Usually what we find is it ends up being that one little part of the whole assessment was missed somehow. And by highlighting as you go along, it really does help you to get all those pieces.
Right. And I just want to say, I think we all take for granted whether or not the folks on the other end of these trainings know what a cost report is.
Yep.
Because it's one of the first things that you should probably see when you're a lister. If you're not familiar with what the document is that we're talking about, the examples that were sent as an attachment to the email that included the training document, you will see a cost report, actually 5 different cost reports in that document. So hopefully I haven't gone too far down this rabbit hole without mentioning that. I apologize. All right, now improvement value in the overview box versus valuation. Christy, you want to talk about this one too?
So again, this is just making sure that you've got all the pieces, and that improvement box should be all of the pieces that you're going to see either in dwelling and non-enrolled or enrolled farm buildings. The only place where this gets a little dicey, it's pretty clear when we're talking about Microsolve, but it does get a little dicey on some of the other CAMA programs as to where site improvements fall in these pieces. So that's the only thing I would caution you about there.
Absolutely. For terminology purposes, improvement value for this purpose is anything that is not land.
Yep.
I do know that some CAMA programs, I believe Patriot calls things that are not dwellings, they call them yard items. So the terminology is going to be different, but if you remember that improvement value is anything that is not land, that will help you understand this process.
Yeah, we want to keep, for this purpose, we want to keep the land absolutely pure. So anything pure land is going to go in excluded and enrolled, and everything else is going to go in one of those boxes for dwelling or farm buildings.
And Jeannie was saying worker housing, and I replied, if they're enrolled. So all that Christy's talking about with the buildings and farm buildings are the ones that are enrolled. So the rest of it would all be non-homestead value. And there's also a comment about NIMRIC has a current use worksheet that is very helpful with calculations. Hopefully you'll be able to do it, just not even thinking about it after we're done.
Right. I do know that that Chris did create a new current use calculator, different than the land calculator that we're most familiar with. And we'll certainly we'll talk about that towards the end too. All right. So important to everything that we've talked about so far, and in your lister's office in general, it's really important to understand your land values and your land schedule. If you're going to allocate land value and current use, you must understand how this works. The land schedule and the multipliers that Christy will talk about a little bit more eloquently than I can. Do you want to start from there, Christy?
So I would say if you take nothing else away from this class, take this away. You have to understand how your land schedule works in order to allocate current use values properly and according to statute. If you don't, then you need to find out. You need to start with, you can certainly, your DA can help you. If you're in Microsoft, if you're in another CAMA system, you need to ask, how does my coding work? I need to understand exactly how I'm valuing land and what the different codes in my CAMA system mean and how they work. Because everything we're going to talk about hinges on understanding that. And if you don't understand it, you're not going to be able to do it correctly. So if you take nothing else away, please take that away. That I don't understand and I got to figure this out first before I do any pieces of my current use. Okay. So things we need to understand about a land schedule. Land schedule was developed at the time of your last reappraisal. It's what you use to value all the land within your town. You may have multiple land schedules. If you have, let's say, a lake or something like that, you might have a different land schedule. But you have a land schedule for all land values within your town. Developed at the time of reappraisal, represented average land for your town at the time of reappraisal. Okay, so one of the pieces here is, in order to understand your land schedule, you have to understand what they qualified average as for your town. What are the attributes of average, right? And then from that, average being a 1.0 multiplier, we have other multipliers that will affect the land value for anything that's different than average. So I have a beautiful view. I have a long access driveway. I have very steep topography. Those are the kinds of things that might be multipliers to my average land value that changes it for different attributes, right? I also may have neighborhood multipliers within that also change it from the average land schedule. Okay, and this is a whole class. Land schedule is a whole separate class that we teach, but I'm giving you some of the basics so that you can understand as we go forward how we're going to allocate pieces according to statute and use our land schedule appropriately. So typically what you'll have, hopefully in your hand, if not behind the scenes in your computer, is what's known as a full land schedule, which includes a site value, and a residual or bulk land schedule, which is after I take off the site value, kind of the leftover land, right? I put 2 acres on, and those might be at a higher rate, and then the rest of my land goes in at a bulk or residual rate. Okay? And you should have those 2 pieces ideally in front of you. If you don't have them on paper, see if you can get them. If you have Microsoft, ask Chris if he could print them out for you. Okay? If you have another system, ask if you can have printed land schedules so that you can see them and understand them and see that what you're putting in for coding works with the math that you're looking at. And then the last part you have to understand is as part of that land schedule is the whole logic that goes behind the way land sells. And the way land sells is what we call a volume discount or economy of scale. In other words, the more I buy, the less per acre I'm going to pay. Okay, economy of scale. So if I go to Costco, for example, and I want to buy toilet paper, and I buy 1 roll of toilet paper, it's going to be much more expensive per roll than if I buy a whole big raft, 24 rolls of toilet paper. Those are going to be cheaper per roll. That's the kind of idea we're talking about, economy of scale.
So I feel kind of silly using eggs as an example with a price point because we know how eggs are a point of contention at the moment, but
Right.
so if when we were giving this class and other classes in person, Christy always carries around a very colorful dozen eggs for this example. So if you purchase a dozen eggs, back when we created this slideshow a while ago, I wish we could buy a dozen for this now. The cost was $3.36 for a dozen. So if you do the math and divide that by 12, that averages out to about 28 cents per egg. If at the time you were purchasing just a half a dozen eggs, the cost was $2. Divide that by 6, that gives you an amount of 33 cents per egg. And then if you purchase just the single egg, I don't know who would do that or where, but that's okay. It would be about 50 cents an egg. So just trying to illustrate there that the more you buy, the less you pay per item. I think Terry and Christy do a great little farmer stand skit on this one with one of our classes. But anything to add there about your colorful eggs, Christy?
So use it in whatever resonates to you, right? What do you go to Costco to buy? The reason we go to Costco is to buy in bulk, right? The reason we do that is because it's cheaper to buy in bulk. So if you can put that logic in your head as to that's the way land sells, then you'll kind of understand the basis of a land schedule. Okay.
And then after talking about the mysterious land schedule, here's a sample.
Right. So this is just, I gotta say this because it always happens. This is not your land schedule. Yours will be different. The land schedule that you have was based on your time of reappraisal, what land was selling for at the time, and average land within your town. But you should have something that looks similar to this with different numbers. So on the left-hand side is what I referred to as the full or site land schedule. And on the right-hand side is what I referred to as the residual or bulk. I like to call it the leftover, okay? Because my brain processes it easier that way. So if we think about, let's take an example here, and I think we talk about this later as well. If we took 10 acres on the full land schedule, that means it includes a site value. And here we have $125,000 for 10 acres. Okay. That would be the same as saying 2 acres off the full land schedule at 65 plus 8 acres off the residual schedule at 60. It equals 125,000. So this is where it's important to understand how we code things in our CAMA system, because, for example, in Microsoft, you can code something as acreage total. And what you're telling the program to do is to push it to the full schedule and include a site. And you can, or you can say, no, I'm going to do it as a building lot and then acreage other for the backland. You can do it either way. But if you inadvertently coded something as a total, you're going to charge somebody for an extra site that you didn't want to. So this is where not understanding our coding and our system can really make a huge difference, right? And that's why I'm saying if you take nothing else away, take this away, that I have to understand how to code land in my system in order to process this.
Absolutely. And again, we have a whole other class on this land schedule. We are offering it this summer, I think.
I believe so.
Yep. So keep an eye out for that if you are interested in learning how land schedules are built and how to read them.
Help me.
Okay, so I have one thing here. It says, maybe a silly question, but in some towns, very little changes hands. Can adjacent towns info be used? Going far back in time now seems like a bad idea, given inflation as of late.
It absolutely can be. When
So
you're building a land schedule, but remember, all we're doing right now is applying the land schedule that you have. Okay? You're not going to develop a new land schedule until you do reappraisal, and then that won't be yours to do. It will be the contractor's job to do. But will they look at other towns that are comparable in the market? Absolutely.
Yeah. Without going too far into the weeds, if we remember that the use value that's being calculated behind the scenes is taking into consideration your CLA. The purpose of CLA adjustment to the tax rate on your tax bill is an attempt to bring your value or your final tax liability closer to current market value. So we're not seeing it so much on the value itself, but we're seeing it in the final tax that's due. That same adjustment is being made in the background of the program because it's taking into consideration the age and the condition of your grand list by virtue of your CLA. I don't know if you can say that in a different way that might be easier to understand, Christy.
I'm not sure I can.
Okay. Happy to chat about that if on the side or, at break, if anybody has questions. Right. And then before we take another quick break, we're going to talk about the research that's required to do these allocation of values that we're going to talk about more in depth after the break. So things that you might need to have on hand and should have on hand when you're allocating values, particularly for the first time, or at any point that there's a change to the application. Your property tax maps, your lister's cost sheet or property record card, depending on the program that you use, a copy of the deed, your current use maps that are provided to you from current use. You may need to do a site inspection, depending on your knowledge of the area and what is actually being enrolled versus not enrolled. The application itself, and the current use local parcel report that will show you how to print out a VTPIE. Christy?
So again, don't panic. Most years that you're going through these, you're not going to have to do all of these pieces because oftentimes what you'll find is that a property hasn't changed at all. And if it's not changed, you're confirming the data that you have is the same and you move right along through the process. If anything has changed or it's a new application, then this is where we have to dig in to all the pieces and make sure that we really fully understand so that we can apply values appropriately.
All right, so now let's talk about document page 10, allocation of values. So current use allocations are separate and do not affect a parcel's total real assessment. You want to talk about that one a little bit, Christy?
So let's talk about what allocation is. Allocation is the breaking down of all the pieces parts for taxability. When we went through those pieces, dwellings, farm buildings, excluded land, enrolled land, you could see where we got to the taxable amount at the end. That's why we do this, because if someone's enrolled in current use, we have to give all the pieces parts so that they will get that exemption correctly and therefore the taxable value correctly. That's the lister assessor's job, is to take all these parcels of it that are enrolled and break down all those pieces so that the then exemption can be applied appropriately for tax billing purposes. Okay, so when we talk about allocation, that's what we mean, breaking down all those pieces for taxability.
All right. And when we say that it does not affect the total real assessment, what we're trying to emphasize is that when you're doing this process, if you're trying to use your CAMA program to calculate a land value, which again, we'll show you how to do in a moment, if anything that you do changes the listed value in your CAMA program on your cost report, then we've coded something wrong in that CAMA program. So this process should never, ever change your listed value in CAMA or your grand list.
Correct.
Okay. Oh, there we go. I'll emphasize it one more time. Allocating value should never involve changing your total grand list value. All right, so now oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
Kristen.
do you want to go back there just for a second? I'm just going to walk through those pieces. So the separate values that we're going to need, and we're going to talk about each of these, is the dwellings with site improvements, okay, and any non-farm buildings. And when we say that, we mean non-enrolled farm buildings. An enrolled farm building means that the person can put that building in the program and therefore pay zero tax on it if it is eligible. Okay. That leads us to number 2, which is farm buildings that are enrolled. And we will glean that information from the exchange, and we'll show you where to find that information, and from the application. And then excluded land, which is that land that is not enrolled in the program, either because it couldn't be, it wasn't eligible, or because the person chose not to. Okay. So for example, if you have a house, typically, I always say typically, you're required to keep 2 acres out around your house. But the person may decide, okay, well, I got another 10-acre parcel that I don't really want to enroll. So that's going to be in my excluded land. And we're going to talk about how you have to look at that, see what it is in order to break down the value. And then the last is the enrolled land, which is the land that is in fact in the program under the different delineations of ag, conservation, forest, right? And that they have signed a contract that they're going to continue to use that land for that purpose. So we have to break down values, parts of our value for each of these things to then get to that taxable amount.
So the question is a good place to probably ask, are the enrolled farm buildings site improvements, septic, water, landscaping also exempt?
So sorry, go ahead.
So I think the question is asking whether or not the site improvements, the water, sewer, landscaping, if your town charges for landscaping, is considered when calculating the enrolled or excluded land values. Those values are going to show up for Microsolve clients. They're going to show up as site improvements or improvements to the property, separate from the land value. If there are enrolled buildings that have designated water or sewer that are only used by those structures, those values are not eligible for exemption because the statute reads that the buildings are exempt. And
Correct.
That was an interpretation that we received from Michael's predecessor.
I agree.
I think that answers the question.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, and it's not that it's not valued. It certainly still has value in the listed value. It's just not
Yes.
eligible for exemption.
Correct. It would be in the taxable portion.
I have to wrap my mind around the language here sometimes, because exemption to me sometimes means something different than what exemption means on the tax bill. So sorry for the slow processing there.
It's okay.
totally fair. We all use interchangeable terms for things, and it has definitely got us into some sticky situations. So we try and be very clear when we're talking about allocation versus the exemption on the tax bill. All right. So now let's start talking about the steps to do that said allocation. So now we're looking in your document on page 10. We're going to start, it's at the bottom third of your page. And it'll continue on over to page 11 with a diagram that you might want to keep handy as we go through these steps. So number one, we're going to talk about excluded land calculation and how to enter it. Christy?
So can you go back one slide just for a second?
Yeah.
Part of the reason that I said that it's so super important to understand how your land schedule works and how to code it is because according to statute, and this is referring to a statute, Title 32, Vermont Statutes Annotated is the VSA 3756. There is a section in there, I believe it's D, that talks about how land that is excluded is to be valued for this purpose. And the way that it talks about it is that you should consider the excluded land as a standalone parcel, which means that we want it to be not part of the whole. In other words, they're not going to get the volume discount. And this is one of the hardest concepts about current use, right? Anything that they've excluded from the program is to be valued as a standalone parcel, meaning that I don't pay any attention to the rest of the land when I'm allocating the value for it. And this might also mean that I have a value that I'm creating that doesn't exist on my cost sheet in some scenarios. So I need to be able to know how to use my land schedule, and if you're using Microsoft, how to use the current use calculator to value that excluded land as a standalone parcel. It's going to give it a higher value typically than it would as a portion of the whole, because as we talked about the eggs, right? When I treat something as less acreage, it's going to be more valuable or have more value than I do if it's a part of a larger portion.
Absolutely. The full text of that statute is available at the end of your document. You'll notice that there are 3 pages of relative statutes for fair market value and use value appraisal. So I'll just go ahead and read it so you don't have to flip to the back there. So it is 3756 section D. The assessing officials shall appraise qualifying agricultural and managed forest and farm buildings at use value appraisal as defined in subdivision 375212, which is also provided in this addendum. If the land to be appraised is a portion of a parcel, any portion not receiving a use value appraisal shall be valued at its fair market value as a standalone parcel. And for the purposes of the payment under section 3760 of this chapter, the entire parcel shall be valued at its fair market value as other similar parcels in the municipality. So what this is trying to say is, just because it's in current use doesn't change the overall value. And also the piece that's excluded must be valued as a standalone piece for this allocation piece.
Yep.
I think that's probably one of the most confusing things that as a lister and a DA that we've come across in trying to implement and also to explain. So if that sounded very confusing, you're not alone. It does take some time to wrap your head around that. But again, we're going to go through at least 5 examples that will try and hit this home. And again, your DA is always available to explain.
Yep.
So I have from Jeff Barlow. So typically the excluded value is the top portion of one's land schedule anyway.
So I think if you are only excluding 2 acres, then that is a true statement. because 2 acres as a standalone parcel is going to be the same as the first 2 house site acres in your CAMA program. Once you go beyond that 2 acres, then that is no longer the case.
Right. So if you remember, I said there can be many reasons why someone might exclude something. So one of them might be that 2 acres under the house. That's usually an easy answer, right? I've got it right on a cost sheet typically, no problem. I don't have to do a lot of work on that. But what about the one I mentioned where it's 2 acres plus 10 down the road all on my contiguous parcel, but it's on the other corner of my land? That's a different question, right? It still requires me to treat it as if it's one standalone parcel. So now I've got 2 plus 10, or do I have 2 sites if I charged it as 2 sites? There's all sorts of questions that come there, which may require, which Deanna said, a site inspection. Because if I don't know what that 10 acres is, I got to know in order to value it. It's a new appraisal question. Okay, so I've got to look at the map and I've got to say, what in fact is that excluded land? Where is it? What does it look like? What are the attributes? And then I've got to use my land schedule appropriately to come to the value that's correct, right, for what it is.
Okay, so then I have a standalone piece from the full value or residual.
Depends. Okay, and the reason I say it depends is because I don't know what it is. If it's 10 acres that I excluded because it's swampland in the back portion that could never be built on, right? Then perhaps I don't want to use the full land schedule, including a site. If they excluded it because it is in fact a site or could in fact be the site on the parcel, then I would want to. So I can't give you an absolute answer to that. You have to look at every single one and you have to say, what are they excluding and what's the appropriate value to place on that?
Yep. And we do have some pretty complex examples, which I'm sure will go into the same detail. Again, no one is expected to walk away from this class and be able to sit down as a brand new lister and do everything that we're describing here. There's a learning curve here. That's why you have a DA. That's why if your DA is away, there's always a DA on call. You can always reach one of us to help you with this, whether it's the concept in general or a specific valuation question. Any other questions, Terry, or comments?
No, you're good.
All right, thank you. We're good, Christy?
Yep.
All right.
Hang on, I just got one. We have an individual who has to remove 1/3 acre of a new septic system from current use. Should we add it to the 2 acre house site or separate as a 1/3 acre parcel?
So it sounds like they're doing a withdrawal from the program. So I would wait until Michael's office processes it on your current use exchange, and then you'll know how to allocate it, right? Again, 2 separate processes. You probably had to value it for the withdrawal. And now we've got to say, where does it live in my allocation or my breakdown? And I would wait for Michael's office to tell me exactly that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I do often see people trying to work with clerks and listers to kind of solve pretty complex current use issues when really just a call to a specialist could, we can direct them in the right path.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So again, pages 10 and 11 are what we're focusing on now. And I think that the diagram at the bottom of page 11, if you follow along as we describe all of these steps, will help you understand where we're putting things in the VTPIE program. So again, first we're going to talk about the excluded land value calculation. That's where I like to start. I think Christy likes to start here. There are different ways to do this math, but we're going to do it the way that makes sense in our heads so that we can at least steer you down one clear path.
Yep. So again, if it were me, the way that I like to do it is I like to have that cost sheet in front of me. And I like to think about with my highlighter, what am I allocating for now? So I like to start with excluded land because that is the one that has a statute behind it to say how I have to allocate it. So I'm going to look at, as we said, figure out what that standalone value is for the excluded land. And then I'm going to enter that number, whatever it is that I come up with, into my current use exchange in VTPIE. And if it's homes, if they've declared a homestead, I'll put it in the homestead column under excluded land. Right? In
Alright.
your little grid on the bottom of page 11, that would be column 2, row 3. If it's a homestead. If there's no homestead, then I'm going to enter that number in column 3, row 3. Make sense? If there's a homestead filed, then all land is homestead. If we start with that presumption, then we'll know what to do with it. If there's no homestead filed, then it's going to go into the non-homestead.
So then we have the rest of the land value as the enrolled land calculation.
Okay, so now we've allocated according to statute our excluded land. And as we talked about, that might take a larger portion of the whole, okay? So in order to say what we're allocating enrolled land as, we have to go to our total land value from the cost sheet, subtract what we valued that excluded land at, and that equals our enrolled land value. The leap of faith here is that that number might never exist on your cost sheet. If it's not a straight up 2 acres with residual land that's being excluded, then the numbers that you're applying here might not exist on your cost sheet because we're changing the way that we're doing it, right? We still need to get to the same total for land, but we're giving the excluded a larger portion of the whole. So that gets a little tricky for folks. And stop me if you're not understanding what I'm saying. Okay, so once we've done that, what I like to call mathematical remainder, enrolled land is really a mathematical remainder. Total land minus what I've said excluded is worth is my enrolled land value for allocation purposes. I'm going to then put that number in that grid in VTPIE. If it's homestead, again, I'm going to put it in the homestead column, column 2, row 4. If there's no homestead filed, I'm going to put it in column 3, row 4.
Sorry, I'm a little slow on my fly-ins here.
Okay. Were you going to add something there, Deanna?
No, I was just going to say the second leap of faith that we're asking you to take now is to bear with us as we walk through these steps, because again, we're going to hit it home with some samples or some examples. So.
Yep.
All right, so now that we've talked about land, let's talk about buildings. So number 7 are enrolled farm buildings, if applicable, on your application.
Yep, so we need to determine either we can look at the application or right in our VTPIE screen, there will be a section that will say enrolled farm buildings, yes, and a drop down that will show you how many if there are in fact enrolled farm buildings. And then what we need to do is determine, okay, if I have enrolled farm buildings, which buildings are they on the cost sheet? And make sure that if they're enrolled farm buildings in terms of eligibility, that I have labeled them as non-homestead. Because by definition, an enrolled farm building is a business use and therefore non-homestead.
Right. So if you happen,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you happen to be going through a reappraisal right now, I would definitely try to tap the expertise of your reappraisal contractor while they're out in the field so that they can identify the buildings that can then have the homestead flags removed for this purpose, so that they are not included erroneously in the homestead value.
So once you determine what they are, again, were it me, I'd have that cost sheet right there, right? And if they're not correct, if they're not homestead, it might require going back and forth with your CAMA uploads. That's where we might have to do some fixing. Once I've determined what they are, I can highlight them on my cost sheet, add them together, and then I'm going to enter those in enrolled farm buildings under column 3, row 2. Non-homestead enrolled farm building. They're always going to be non-homestead because, again, by definition, they're business use. And again, for folks that are new, an enrolled farm building is not the same as just any old farm building. It means you have to have included it as part of your application with Michael's office, and it has to have been approved to be an enrolled farm building by definition, and therefore it will end up being exempted at the end of the process here.
Right. And I believe, I think I see some comments in the chat about identifying farm buildings, and I mentioned the reappraisal contractors, but I believe too, Michael, if you could just confirm that the new maps that are coming into your office have those farm buildings identified.
Yes, they should.
Yep. Okay.
And I want to add also, in Kim, I think somebody may have said it, you may have one building that has 4 listings in it because it has a hayloft, because it has a lean-to, because it has, you know, the milk house, but they're all attached or something. Then understand that your record may have 4, but current use may have 1.
Yep. Yep. And this might be where, you know, in those large farm parcels, you might have to make a visit and say, can we talk about your farm buildings? Right? So that I can label them on this sketch or whatever, and I know which ones that we're talking about here. And certainly, as Deanna mentioned, the time of reappraisal is the time to really get those things cleaned up so that they, you know, you're labeling accurately and you can tell going forward what's what.
I actually saw a current use map that was provided by a new forester to my area, at least, that listed the buildings in the order that the cost report had the buildings from the lister's office. And I thought that was exceptionally helpful. So if you do see foresters in your office, I would just put in that little nugget there that if you can give them a copy of the cost report, it might help them help you in the long run.
Right. Yeah, we're hoping it'll get better as we go along. Okay, so then it also says to add a 0 in the column 2, row 2, because enrolled farm buildings are never going to be homestead. I think in VTPIE it doesn't allow you to enter anything in there anyway. I think we've sort of overridden that. So yes, it says this should be done for you in VTPIE.
Yes. Yep.
So at least it forces you to put them in the right place, in theory.
Right. Right. And we said enter 0 here because we're also going to use this as a walkthrough for folks when they take their homework home tonight.
Yes,
and,
good point.
work through a couple of samples. So this will be a step-by-step guide for how to do the
Yep.
samples that we're going to go over.
Yep.
So now we've addressed the enrolled farm buildings. And though it's at the top in row 1 of your evaluation or allocation field, then we're going to talk about total real value minus homestead. Sorry.
Right. So
Yeah.
there's a couple of ways that you can attack this next question. The question is, aside from farm buildings, do I have any other non-homestead use? Now, you might automatically know your cost sheet well enough to know, and you can go find it and plug it in. If you don't, then the mathematical way to find that would be to say, my real minus my homestead always equals my non-homestead. Right? We talked about that. And if that number equals what I've just entered for enrolled farm buildings, then there's no other non-homestead value to deal with. Okay? If there is, I want to know what it is. So for example, let's say that the person also has business use of or rental use of their home. Maybe I have some other non-homestead use that I need to put in the top box under dwelling non-farm, okay, under non-homestead. So that would go in column 3, row 1. If your non-homestead value equals your enrolled farm building value, then you're done, and everything else is going to go into the homestead box for dwellings and non-farms. Okay, we're just kind of trying to get you to back into all those pieces.
So I think the way I try and reconcile this piece, or where I see value in this box most often, in box number 10, are if there are those site improvements that we talked about, the water and septic to the
Yep.
barn that's dedicated, that's not eligible for enrollment, that would
Yep.
go in this box.
Yep.
And my other favorite example is the farmer's wife has a pottery studio. That is a separate outbuilding, and she runs her pottery business out of that building. It's non-homestead because it's business use, but it's not an enrolled value. So we have to be very careful to not just default to entering the non-homestead total value in this column without some consideration of where it really belongs.
Yep.
Oops. All right, and then from there we have box 11. So we're going to talk about the homestead value for the dwelling and non-enrolled farm building homestead value. Christy?
So assuming that you have a homestead again, then everything else that's not non-homestead is going to go in that dwelling and non-enrolled farm building box, which is column 2, row 1. Because we went about isolating everything that was land, then we isolated everything that was non-homestead. Now we're left with everything else, which is then going to go in that homestead dwelling box.
And
Okay.
then we have box 12, which is actually the total column. And this will be the total amount of your dwellings and non-enrolled farm buildings. We're saying enter it here because again, we're going to use this as our step-by-step examples, but the program is actually going to total those two columns for you.
Yep. It just kind of shows you, and this is always just a good, if you're wanting to understand the math, it's a good way to walk through. Does this equal this, right? Homestead plus non-homestead across the box on the top should equal my total and so forth, right? I should get back to my total, and VTPIE does this total column for you. But 1, you want to check it for your own knowledge, and 2, if you're doing it by hand, you want to certainly know how it works.
I can hear people saying, why on earth would we want to do this by hand? But I will tell you that there is great power in understanding how this works and to
There
be able
really
to
is.
explain it to your taxpayers.
Honest to God, if you spend the time to do it a few times and force yourself to actually do every single piece of the math, you will feel so much more confident when you explain it to a person.
Absolutely. All right. So then we
So
have
one thing for probably Michael, I guess, would be, can they get the maps for individual parcels as an attachment in VTPIE?
I think we do upload maps into VTPIE at this point. Am I answering that question? No, we don't. Sorry, I just got yelled at. We don't.
I don't think we do it as a matter of course. The question is, can we?
Oh, can we? Yeah, I got to talk to the powers of
Okay.
the.
Okay.
So we'll check into it.
Yeah, we'll check into it.
I think it's the goal. We're just not quite there yet.
Yes, I think that's exactly the case. Yep.
Other things.
Yeah.
All right. And then
I've always heard since I've been here that listers really like paper maps. So I'm not sure if there's any kind of like, if there's two sides to that or not, but.
Yeah, I've seen some really big paper maps that I would imagine would be really hard to scan and have attached in a usable way in VTPIE, but digitization is definitely the goal. So I guess we'll put a strong maybe on that one, right, Michael?
Yeah, we'll go strong maybe on that one.
All right.
I think as our maps get more digitized, then it will be easier going forward to also make them part of the whole puzzle.
Yeah, I think we're getting there. You know,
Yeah.
the vision's there. We just kind of got to work out the details.
Yep.
All right, so with our numbers, that just leaves us with 13, 14, and 15, which are your totals columns for both, or for all things, the total listed value, your total homestead value, and your total non-homestead value. Again, the system does those totals for you, but when we do the step-by-step, we're gonna put those in that exact order.
Yep, and the VTPIE system, when you click on the bottom to verify and save, it's gonna not allow you to proceed if it doesn't match what you have in your CAMA that you've downloaded. Your last CAMA that you've downloaded. So if you get a little pink ribbon that says there's an error, then you gotta go back because it's not adding up to what you have on top. We gotta go back through the pieces and see what's wrong.
I find a common error is when there's dwelling in non-farm buildings. If you look in it's usually the pieces that are not split out between homestead and non-homestead.
Yes, I
Because
agree.
any part of a farm is always business use. So look at that piece first.
Yep, that's why, you know, some people find it kind of funny that we go land and then farm buildings and then other, but it forces you to look at those pieces. That's why.
Christy,
Yeah.
I'd also just say that as you're entering those figures, sometimes if it is an updated value in your grand list for the parcel and what's carried over on the application from current use is an old value, as you're entering those figures, the total doesn't change until you hit the save button, which you guys will demonstrate when you do VTPIE.
Correct.
But a lot of times what's happening is people are entering the right things and they're like, but the total's not changing, this isn't going to work. But you have to hit that save button for it to try to calculate.
Yeah, good point. Is that it's not adding up as you go along. The adding is when you click that button. So you won't see it until you get to the bottom. And then you'll know because it won't let you go past it.
All right, so once we've gone through those steps and we try and hit that save and verify button, or just the save button if you don't want to quite verify just yet, things to consider. Do your numbers match? Does the total listed value in column 1 match the total real value on your cost sheet? Does the total listed value in column 2 match the homestead on your cost sheet? And does the total listed value in column 3 match the difference between the total real and homestead? Christy?
I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Okay, so again, the answer, to the question, why on earth would we ever want to do this by hand? It allows you to confirm what you've entered in the spot or in the field in VTPIE. And you've already done the math, so you know that it should match. If for some reason it isn't matching at that point, it might be because you dropped a 0 or added an extra 0. I know I've run into some issues where if you click in the field, the 0 already exists. So if you type in the full number, you're actually getting an extra digit. So little things like that can cause the imbalance in value, but usually are pretty easily identified if you have the numbers in front of you.
I also think it's really important to remember the goal is to make sure that we're putting it in the right place, not just to get it to be able to be done and proceed. And right. So our human nature is to say, I want to get off this parcel. What do I need to do? Oh, there's $500. I'll put it here. Right. Whereas we really want to understand, where does that $500 belong? Because it goes to taxability at the end of the day. And I want to make sure I'm putting it in the right place, not just that I can get out of this parcel and have it match, because you can put it in the wrong place and still have the correct total.
Absolutely. And that has definitely been some listers more than once.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm muting myself with my enter button here. All right, so then again, this is that grid that we hoped you were following along with. I apologize, I didn't get the numbers on the rows in the document, but they are here on the slideshow. So as we're talking about column 1 and row 1, 2, 3, or 4, this is what we're talking about. And then this is the order in which we asked you to follow us down the path to enter the information. Just gonna click through here.
And as we go through any of the examples that we do, this is the way that we'll do it. Whether you choose to do it exactly this way is up to you. But again, I would also encourage you to have that cost sheet and be highlighting as you allocate, and it helps you to really say, oh, what do I have left? What didn't I get? What am I missing, right?
Absolutely. I'm just going to hit the enter button a whole lot of times here to fill in the rest of this grid. And we're going to talk about the importance of items 13 through 24 as we continue on with. Right. So as we've already emphasized more than once, we always want to begin with the excluded land. We want to make sure that we've researched what that excluded land is. We need to make sure that if we're using our CAMA program to find that standalone value, that it is not influenced at all by the acreage of the entire parcel, right? We want that economy of scale. Find the parcel you're working on in CAMA. That's a very general statement. Christy, do you want to expand on that?
So with all of the systems, no matter what CAMA you have, you need to know what the neighborhood is for that parcel. You need to know what the grades are for that parcel, because then you're going to be looking at a section of it. And if I'm going to break that section out, I need to know what neighborhood it is, because I got to code that, right? If I'm using it, you may, depending on what system you're using, you may have a test parcel that you're going to enter to value that excluded land, or you may be using the current use calculator, right? But either way, you've got to think about what's the land now and what portion of it am I looking at for this independent appraisal or value piece. So how does it correlate to the overall grade, right? Is it part of that steepness that needs a lower grade, or is it the better part of the land that I need a higher grade on? Those are the kinds of things that you need to know in order to then value that piece.
So then in order to use the Microsoft product to find that value, we would go to what was the land OB tab. I think everybody's been updated, but I can't be certain, so that there is a separate land tab. I don't know if anybody can confirm that or whether it's relevant. The system functions the same way, regardless of the name of the tab. You're going to go to the place in your CAMA program where you would add or change a land valuation. So for this exercise, if you don't already have a current use calculator created on this particular parcel that we're looking for a value, you're going to add a new land ID, which may be 2 or more, depending on the complexity of the piece that you're valuing. And you're going to use very specific coding that we'll talk about for current use values. That way it does not impact your parcel value. So for an example that we're going to talk through here, a parcel has a total excluded land of 7 acres. You look at the current use map and see that 2 acres is a house site and 5 acres is in a corner and is not touching the other 2 acres. You should value the 2 acre house site acres, the 2 house site acres using a current use site and building lot, and that would be coded as a 6-1 in the Microsoft product. For those first 2 acres at the grade that's currently applied on your cost sheet. You should code the other 5 acres as current use acres other. Those specific codes are a 7 and a 5, at an appropriate grade based on your knowledge and research of that portion of the land, and account for all factors that affect that portion of land. Christy?
Yes. So the important part to think about this current use calculator in Microsoft, it's a layer that you're adding on top of your value. You don't have to take away land from your main piece. You don't have to touch your main piece of value. It's going on the same parcel, but as long as you code it correctly, it's just a layer that can exist there and not affect your overall cost. So if I code this as a current use site and building lot and the same grade, it's going to look exactly like what I have on my cost sheet. And then my additional 5 acres, I'm going to use current use acres. That code is super important, and other, right? And then decide my grade. And then I'm going to use my little current use value button, which is at the top of your screen. It's yellow. Some people say it's a little bit green. It says CU. It's right next to the value button, the $ in the house when you're in Microsoft. And what this will give you is a separate cost sheet for just your excluded land. So we'll kind of take you through that, and Deanna's starting to show you. Go ahead, Deanna. So here's what it would look like. I would have added a land ID. Let's assume that I only had 2 to start with. I would have added a land ID number 3. I would have coded it as 6 under calc method as current use site and a building lot, 2 acres, and my original was 1.0 for grade, so I'm going to stay with that. And then I'm going to add another land ID, number 4, and my calc method is going to be current use acres, and I'm going to do other, which gets me to that residual schedule. And I'm going to do 5 acres. And after looking at it and determining, I determined that it was a 0.80 grade for the attributes of the land. Because I looked at it, I looked at the map, I figured out what it was, and I decided that it was a 0.80. Okay. And then I'm going to click that yellow or green button that you see at the bottom there. Lives at the top of Microsoft right next to your value button or your cost button.
Sorry, I have a barking dog.
Oh,
Can you hear him?
no.
Okay. If you can, let me know.
Nope, I cannot. Okay, so then when you click that button, you're going to get a separate cost sheet that says right at the bottom, you can see that it says total current use excluded land. The nice part about this is it gives you a cost sheet using your land schedule as a separate standalone parcel according to what you use in the backgrounds. So in theory, this would be similar to another 7-acre parcel in that area with similar attributes in your town. So the question you then need to ask yourself, is this a fair amount for that 7 acres as a standalone parcel? Okay. Because that's your charge. That's what the statute says. Value it as a standalone parcel. Is this 7 acres in my town worth $95,000 if it's sold separately? And do I feel confident in that? Okay. And then you can see at the bottom, our original total value on our original cost sheet was 2 acres and 35 of residual land. I had a total of 37 acres and my total was 180,500. So it's a totally separate piece and it's going to look different from what I have on my cost sheet.
So one of the first questions that I always get when going through this exercise with new listers in their offices is, but how is 7 acres worth over half of a 37-acre parcel?
It's the eggs.
It's the eggs.
Or the toilet paper, or the beer, or whatever you want to buy at Costco.
All right. So seeing that that value is so high is not a reason to think that you've done it incorrectly. Like, you've gone through the
Correct.
process of identifying the 2-acre site that already existed on your cost sheet And then we're removing 7 acres as though it's, or the other 5 acres as though it doesn't consider the economy of scale for everything else. This is also a really hard part to explain to the taxpayer, but if you resort to the eggs or toilet paper, cans of tuna fish, whatever, works for you and your taxpayer, in that particular scenario, it's a really powerful tool to be able to explain. They might not like the answer, but that's how we're going to do it.
Yep, agreed. So there's your excluded land value, and your total land value in this case is 180,500.
All right, if you're following along, this is all on page 14 of your document. So now let's find the enrolled value. Christy?
So again, we like to think of the enrolled value as the leftover mathematical remainder, right? This is the number we're not going to see on a cost sheet. We're going to take your total land value of 180,500. We're going to subtract what we've said we've allocated is the excluded land is worth, which was $95,000. And therefore our enrolled 30 acres is worth 85,500 for allocation purposes. It's the remainder after we allocate excluded according to statute. And this number doesn't exist on your cost sheet. What I like to do is I like to print out that cost sheet that I've created with my current use calculator for the 95, and then I like to write this math right on the bottom so that I can show to a taxpayer, this is how I got there.
Absolutely. And I do believe that the new calculator that Nemrick has provided in the Microsoft product does that math for you. Anything that provides me numbers, I always want to verify myself. So even though that's printing out on a current use cost report or calculator, always verify the numbers against your actual cost report.
Yep.
All right. I'm assuming we probably have some questions in the chat, Terry, before we move on.
Okay, we have Lois, Donald. Emphasize, stand alone.
Yeah, so when you say stand alone, you're saying as if they only own the 7 acres. That's what that means. It's all by itself. I don't have another 30 acres. I don't have another. All I have for this purpose is 7 acres. What's it worth?
It's like pretending I'm buying the property.
Yep.
Or I purchased the property. It's got nothing to do with the rest of the property.
Exactly. Put your blinders on. It's all by itself.
Okay, wouldn't land grade of current use building lot and current use acres be the same as the cost card given grades?
Maybe, maybe not. That's why I got to look. So let's use this example, right? The 2 acres we said was the site that we already had on our cost sheet. Fine, no problem. But we also said there was 5 acres way down in the other corner. So when we talk about the overall grade of a property, it encompasses all of the attributes of that 30 whatever acres, right? So it could be some land that's a really good grade and some land that's a really poor grade because I have to use an overall, what we call composite grade. So I could decide that it's the same and it's all 0.8 land or whatever. Or I could say, you know what? Actually, that 5 acres isn't very good. I've got 0.8 on my cost sheet, but I think I'm going to give that a 0.5. This is part of why we really need to dig in and look at it and say, what in fact are they excluding?
Yeah, and oftentimes I think the new maps that I'm seeing, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, will identify 5 acres of swampland or otherwise impaired land that's not eligible for enrollment. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. So that looking at that map is extremely valuable. You can then identify that someone has seen 5 acres of, very wet land. And then you'll also know where to go see it if you want to put eyes on it to make your opinion of value. In general, you would just grade that much lower than you would the average or that composite grade for the residual land.
And as with everything else in assessing, what did I do to someone else or for someone else?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I could look at a similar parcel and what did I grade there? If let's say it was swampy, what did I grade that at? You always want to be, if nothing else, we want to be as consistent as we possibly can, right?
Absolutely.
All right. So I think I missed how we explain this to the property owner. Is it statutory or suggested by current use?
So the explanation of enrolled land, I'm assuming that we're talking about, and the way that I would explain it is exactly what we're showing on the screen here. So I'm just going to walk through it. So you can see, Mr. Smith, that I've valued your total land at 180,500. According to statute, and I can give you the statute reference, I'm required to treat your excluded land as if it's a standalone parcel, which means if it were to sell separately, what would it sell as? I have determined based on my land schedule and other comparables within my town that I believe that 7 acres would sell for $95,000. I've run it through the land schedule. You can see the cost sheet right here. And this is what I've determined that value to be. This is according to statute. This is how I have to treat it as a standalone parcel. And then the enrolled land becomes the mathematical remainder because my total then has to come back to my total land value. So I have to take my total land value minus my statutory piece equals the remaining land left, which is what you're going to pay use value on rather than my 85,500. Okay. Do you have to explain it this way? No. I'm just telling you how I would walk it through with a taxpayer. And we do have that statutory. That the excluded land valuation piece is absolutely statutory, Title 32, 3756D, which we talked about. We also have on the prior page, and we have in the back of the book.
Right. So again, that power, that confidence that you can find by understanding how this works is both for you and your taxpayer. If they say, how did you come up with this value? And you simply say, I followed statute. That still doesn't really give you or them the answer, even though that is technically the correct answer. We're trying to give you the tools on how to show them on paper how you got there and why.
And understanding, again, this is why we spend so much time on understanding your land schedule, because you also don't want to say to a taxpayer, well, I put 2 acres in and 5 acres in, and the computer gives me this, right? That's not a good answer either. A good answer is at the time of reappraisal, which is what our land schedule is based off of, and everyone in the town is used for land values. This is what the 7 acres would value at. I looked at it. I went and took a ride by the other 5 acres. I think it's a little bit more swampy, so I've decided to put this grade here. I understand that's probably why you had to exclude it. And so this is what I've come out with. I think that if it were 7 acres and it were sold as such, I think that's what it would sell at. If you think differently, then we can talk about it at grievance, but I think that's what we would find.
That's the other important piece here, right? Because along with your change of appraisal notices that most of you are familiar with when you change an overall value or the homestead or the house site, these current use allocations are also grievable. So when they come to you at grievance, you really want to be able to explain that. And if they have an argument that I think that 7 acres is way overvalued because you don't currently understand the impact of those 5 wet acres, then you could have that discussion with them and decide if they really do have a point. Again, being consistent with what you've done with other taxpayers, but it's always important to have that discussion if the taxpayer is willing to have it with you.
Yep.
And when the next one is, when would an additional building lot be added to the land down the road?
I think I know where you're going with that. So I think the question is, when would you add another building lot to the excluded land calculation? And the answer to that is you have to make sure that you've valued in your total value another site or another, right? Because if you haven't, and then you go starting to attribute that and excluded land, that's where you end up with eventually a negative number because you're valuing your excluded land more than what you already had on your cost sheet, and it doesn't make sense. So if, let's say that I have 2 sites that are excluded, right? And I want to say, okay, well, I'm going to charge a site and a site in my excluded land. The first question I have to ask myself is, did I ever recognize that second site in my overall value? If I didn't, then I can't allocate for it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me, but that's only because I've been doing this for a long
I
time.
know, I
Right.
know, I know.
So essentially what Christy's saying is the example on your screen at the very bottom, the original cost sheet. For this particular question, we have only assigned a value for 2 house site acres or 1 building lot.
Right.
If we had an additional building lot in this valuation, then yes, we could consider whether or not that second building lot is part of the excluded land value.
Right.
But only if you've quote unquote charged for it can you create an allocation for it.
Right.
If you
And
run
I
across
think-
them, call your DA. That's what we're here
Yes.
for.
And I think what you just explained and this screen explains the next one where Jeff is asking, will you be giving an example of 7 excluded acres only assessed by logging trail or hiking trail?
Well, we're not going to give that specific example. We're going to give 5 problems that we're going to work through. And I think you'll see a common theme throughout that process because there are probably infinite number of situations that you might find coming through from the current use staff on these applications that need to be considered. That's probably a corner, well, not as much of a corner case as you might think, but it's something that's probably coming up more frequently as foresters or applicants are becoming aware that that might not be eligible for enrollment. Might be something that the current use staff found when they were reviewing their GIS maps. Again, corner cases more intricate than just saying it's a wide open 7 acres of land. The first one or even the 10th one, if you're uncomfortable with it, give us a call. All right, so before we actually get into the examples, we do have farm buildings left to talk about. Do we have any more questions, Terry, or comments?
No, we're good.
Okay. We have about 25 minutes left. And I think we're going to be able to do it. So our goal is to get through farm buildings and then work through the first example in that separate document that was sent to you. So if we could hold questions between, that would be great. So farm buildings and enrolled farm buildings. By definition, as we've already stated, farm buildings are non-homestead as they must be business use of a farmer to be enrolled in current use. These must be coded as non-homestead and non-house site in your CAMA program. Christy?
So before I talked about how in your screen in VTPIE, and you can see that first little arrow there, that will be above all the value screens up with the name and the listed value and so forth. It'll say enrolled buildings, and you'll want to look there and see if there's a number there. If it's 0, then I don't have any farm enrolled buildings. Okay, if there's a number there, I can click on the little button that says view and I can see how many and what they're calling them. For example, 2 barns, 1 sugar house or something like that, which will help me to determine which ones it is. So that's the first place I want to check in terms of what I have for enrolled farm buildings. And then if I have any, as Deanna points out, I'm going to put that value in the non-homestead box under enrolled farm buildings. And again, this is where I want to be really particular that I get it in the right box because mathematically, the program will exempt those buildings from their taxation. Anything I put in that box.
All right. Okay, so review of allocation entry. compare your total listed values to your homestead value for the property. If there's no homestead value, all of the values will appear in your non-homestead column. If there is a homestead value, the difference between your total listed value and your non-homestead value. Sorry, I said that wrong. If there is a homestead value, then help me out, Christy. I'm stumbling.
If there's no homestead value, then all values will appear in the non-homestead column. And if there is a homestead value, what we're looking for next is there any other non-homestead property other than the enrolled farm buildings? So this is where we're going to take our total listed value and say, is there any other non-homestead value? Right? Is the total listed value minus the enrolled farm buildings equal to the homestead? If so, then I'm done. If it isn't, then I've got something else like that little hobby shop you talked about, or that rental use you talked about, which is going to go in the non-homestead box in the dwelling column or row. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I got stumbled up by the chat.
Yeah, I know. It's
I
very
lost
confusing the
focus.
way it's, yep, it's all good.
That's why we do this as a team.
Yeah. All right. So
Do-
I have, when a current use grievance is appealed to the BCA, who has trained that group?
Oh,
Oh.
we'll get to that. Let's
Yeah.
hold
Yeah,
those.
that's we'll
That's
talk
in
about
another
that tomorrow.
time. And
Yep.
then Terry Sabins was talking about farm buildings. She sent an email. Can you mention that quite a few people in current use don't declare their outbuildings for business use in their HS 122 declaration? It can be a little confusing, especially for new listers.
I agree with you, and I think that's a great point, and I will reiterate while we're right here. Even if a person does not declare business use of outbuilding, if they have enrolled farm buildings, those are homestead, and you have to code them as such.
Say that again because you blacked out for a sec.
Oh, did I? Okay.
Yeah.
So even if John Smith, farmer, does not declare any business use on his HS 122, if you get into this system and you see that he has enrolled farm buildings, those have to be non-homestead. So you have to go back into your CAMA and code them as non-homestead, even though it's not what he said on his HS 122, because by definition, they're always non-homestead.
You would
So-
still accept that HS 122, but you could report back to
Sure.
the state via questions and let them know that they didn't.
Yep. If you want them to fix it in the future, but ultimately I own the homestead value and I got to get it right. And if I know he filed wrong, I'm going to correct it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that's it
All
for
right.
questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So in the VTPIE system, the totals will be checked when you click on the verify and save button or just the save button. If your totals match, you'll see a green banner indicating success that'll go across the top of your screen. It's pretty quick, you might miss it. If your totals do not match, then you'll see a pink or a red banner, and we'll have to correct that before you're able to save successfully and verify to finish your work. All right. So now let's get to the super fun part. Let's put what we've learned into action. So if you have printed, if you could grab that other stack of paper, the 5 problems that we've provided to you. And we're going to walk through them. Christy, do you have a copy with you?
I do.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
In the interest of time, we have continued to use the 2020 use values for these examples. That way we don't have to redo them and remake the wheel every year. So just keep that in mind as we're doing this. And when you go back to your office and start to do your own current use examples, please don't use these values because the math is just not going to math for you. All right, so now let's talk about on problem 1, the pieces of information that we are going to need in order to work through this allocation. So
Yep. So
first up,
if you have
go
this, go ahead.
Okay, so first off, and again, you can identify these in whatever order makes sense to you. I'm trying to be consistent. So we're going to look to see how many parcels, I'm sorry, how many acres are in this parcel to begin with. So this parcel, we're going to start out with 21 acres. Okay. And then we're going to look to see what's enrolled. For this example, we have 19 ag acres enrolled, which leaves us with 2 excluded acres. Okay, you with me so far? I hope so. Otherwise, we're all going to get lost. Then we're going to check to see if there are enrolled farm buildings. So the snip that you see on the screen here is actually from the local parcel report. But it's going to give you the same information that you're going to find on the application.
Yep.
All right. In this example, we're going to say that there are 3 farm buildings, okay, that are enrolled. We're going to note that this parcel does have a homestead declaration filed. So we know that everything that we have, unless it's business use, is going to show up in that homestead column, or all the land is going to show up in that homestead column. And then we want to confirm for our calculation that the current or the CLA listed as current is matching your grand list. In this example, it's going to be a 1.0427. Okay. And also in your packet, you have a copy of the cost report. So Christy, you want to take it from here?
Okay, so the first thing that we said that we would want to tackle always is our excluded land. We look at the map and we see what is our 2 acres that is excluded. And in this case, it's the same 2 acres that is our building lot. So these end up being relatively easy because it's exactly what we've already assessed for. And because of the way the land schedule works, it would be no different if we were to value that separately because it's already working off of that front load or full schedule. So we can go right ahead and take that 2 acre excluded value that's on our cost sheet because we know it's exactly what they have in fact excluded. In this case, it's 71,500. So I can go right ahead and put that in my box. If you're filling in the box at the bottom of the page, I would want to put in 2 acres under the amount of acreage. I would want to put in 71.5 under my homestead column excluded land. So column 2, row 3, 71.5. And then also under the total for excluded land, 71.5. And then I can just put a line through non-homestead for excluded land there because land, if there's a homestead filed, which we know there is in this case, land will never be homestead. So I can just put a line through that one. Okay. And then next we said we want to determine what the enrolled land is worth. So what we like to do is take our, actually don't like to do, what we're required to do is a mathematical remainder. In this case, this example is pretty easy. Our total land is 156,400 on our cost sheet. We've allocated the 2 acres at 71.5. So our enrolled land or mathematical remainder is 84.9. Again, with a 2 acre example, it's going to be exactly what you see on the cost sheet. Okay, so my enrolled land, I can fill in that little box at the bottom that there are 19 acres of enrolled land. I can put in 84.9 under homestead enrolled land, column 2, row 4, and also under the total for enrolled land, column 1, row 4.
All right. Are we ready for farm buildings?
Give everybody a second to catch up, yeah?
Sure.
Questions popping up? Are we good, Terry?
No, there's no questions yet.
Okay, so they're either feverishly writing or not. Hard to tell when you're when you're online, right? So now we looked at that box that said, were there enrolled farm buildings? And we saw that there were in fact 3 enrolled farm buildings. So we have to go to our cost sheet and see, do we have 3 farm buildings? And have we coded them as non-homestead? We have, in fact, in this case, and we have 3 of them. We make sure that these are the ones they're referring to and that it makes sense, right? And in this case, we have a total for the 3 enrolled farm buildings of 113,900. So we can go ahead and put that in our box under non-homestead enrolled farm buildings. Column 3, row 2. Okay, we can put a line right through the homestead row there, column 2, row 2, because they're never going to be homestead, because by definition, they're non-homestead enrolled farm buildings. And then we can also put the 113,900 in the total column under enrolled farm buildings. So column 1, row 2, if you're filling these in. Okay. Now we have to say to ourselves, do I have anything else that's non-homestead? You could do this again many different ways. We'll just show you the way that we do it, right? Or that some of us do it, probably me, because I was the one that started this stuff. So I'm going to take my total value, my total property value, 547,100, minus my homestead, which in this case is 433,200, to see what I have for total non-homestead. In this case, it's 113,900. If that equals what I've already allocated for non-homestead because of farm buildings, then I'm good. I don't have any other non-homestead. And I don't in this case. That 113,900 is exactly what I've already entered. Okay. So I can go ahead and put a 0 or a line through the non-homestead dwelling and non-farm building box, which is column 3, row 1. Okay. Now I need to determine what's left. So I can either do that by having eliminated with my highlighter what I have left for numbers, right? So I could do it 2 ways, and I'm gonna talk you through both ways. I could say, okay, my homestead is 433,200. Out of that, I've already allocated the land at 156,400. So I have 276,800 left of value, which is going to be attributed to my dwelling and non-enrolled farm building. And I can go ahead and put that in the homestead column under dwelling and non-farm building. So column 2, row 1. 276,800. I can also put that in the total column, 276,800 for dwelling non-enrolled, column 1, row 1. Okay. If you don't like the way we did that math, you could also say, okay, I'm going to highlight my land because I had already attributed that, and my outbuildings because I already attributed all that. So the only thing I have left is the replacement cost new less depreciation at 261,800 plus my site improvements at 15,000 will get me to my 276,800. 2 different ways of doing it. Okay, I think there's actually a 3rd way there. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of different ways you can get there. Okay. So I think I've filled in all the numbers in the first several before we get to totals.
I think that's true. So the next slide, we're going to fill those in the order that we have done them.
Okay, so I'll talk through it as you go. 71,500 was my excluded land. I put that in the total, and I put that in the homestead because there was a homestead defined. If there's a homestead, then there's never any land in non-homestead, so that's a 0. And then it came up with my enrolled land at 84.9. I put that in my total and also in my homestead for the same reason, and then a 0 in my non-homestead column. Then I attributed my enrolled farm buildings at 113.9, and we have to put that in the total as well as in the non-homestead box. Okay, and then those are never going to be homestead, so I can go ahead and put a 0 in there. And then I determined what was left for non-homestead value. Put a 0 in there because there wasn't anything else left, which left me with everything else going into the homestead box at 276,800 and also into the total box for dwelling in non-enrolled farm buildings. So then I can go about adding each of those columns up. Total should equal what I have on my cost sheet. Homestead should equal what I have on my cost sheet, and non-homestead should equal the difference. Okay. And then I can go ahead and calculate my use value using the numbers that we've given you because we're using an older example. So I have 19 acres of agricultural enrolled land, and the agricultural price that we're using is $382. So 19 at 382 is 7,258 times my CLA in this example. The current year CLA was 104.27, gives me 7,568. We round to the nearest 100, which gives you 7,600 for your use value. So I can go ahead and plug that into the total and the homestead. Again, land is going to be homestead if there's a homestead declared, so I don't need anything there in non-homestead. Okay, now let's talk about which portions are taxable. And this is where I like that we have the little stars on. So we're going to follow the little stars. We're going to pay full tax on dwelling and non-enrolled farm buildings always. So you see little green star, 276,800. I'm going to always pay full tax on that. I'm going to always pay full tax on my excluded land, 71,500. So there's the little blue star. And then rather than pay on the 84,900, which is the enrolled value I've attributed, I'm going to pay on use value. And the little yellow star is there. So if I add 276,800, 71,500, and 7,600, I get 355,900, which will be my taxable value. Okay. And then are we doing exempt reduction next? Okay. And then I can fill that also into the homestead box because we know that the enrolled farm buildings are not taxable by definition if they're in fact enrolled approved farm buildings. So that's going to be a 0 taxable in that column, and all the others will be taxable the same way. Okay. And then I can calculate my exempt reduction, okay, by saying, okay, what do I know is tax exempt? The 113,900, which is farm building and rolls, is exempt from tax. So that's part of my exemption, 113,900. And then the enrolled value of 84,900 minus my use value, which is what I will pay on, is my exempt reduction for the land piece. So if you take 113,900 plus 84,900, which was my full enrolled land value, minus what I actually pay on at 7,600, my exempt reduction will be 191,200. So this is the amount that will then go into NIMRIC when I click on download to billing, and it will reduce the taxation so that their taxable grand list at the bottom line will be 355,900. And if you want to see the pieces parts, right, the non-homestead has an exempt reduction of 113,900, which is the pieces that is the buildings. And then the homestead column has 77.3, which is that 84.9 minus use value of 7,600. The two pieces that add up to the total exempt reduction.
Have we lost anyone? I mean, it looks like we've lost 4 bodies, but hopefully everyone is still with us.
I
Any
have a comment that
questions?
says, please read those again.
Sure. Yep.
Oh, and then she said she's all set.
Oh, okay. All right.
We must be doing something right.
Yeah.
Maybe
Okay.
if you have, maybe if you have a phone, do we have this in the, do they have the answer for this one? I was gonna say if they have a phone, take a picture of this one so that you can use it as an example. If you didn't write them all down.
Yep, I can
Or-
go ahead and email out these answer slides that they have all of the calculations as well, to be able to do the other 4 examples before we start class tomorrow. We will go back over this example again, just in case it still wasn't making sense, and then we will go through each of those 4 problems step
Yes,
by
we
step,
will.
just as we just did, because they each scenario is a little bit more complex. We tried to get a good scope of things that you would generally see in your offices. So, I hope everyone feels like they're comfortable at least giving these a try. You're not being graded. We're just trying to give you some useful tools.
Yep. And we will help you through tomorrow, and we will also, always your DA can help you through either virtually or in your office. This is what we do.
Some of us even enjoy it.
I love it.
I really like the current use stuff. Someone said that was fun.
Oh, yay!
It must be the stars.